He was the deadliest assassin alive and helped his best friend win the throne. His reward was betrayal and the massacre of his entire race. Given a second chance, he returns to the past with only one promise: never trust the nobility again. This time, he'll enter the Magic Academy, grow stronger than ever, and change the future with his own hands. Can the world's greatest assassin finally save the people he failed to protect? Pharaoh's is a kingdom ruled by magicians. The long war for the throne was finally coming to an end. That night, he would finish off the 9th prince, Heinz. The subordinate bowed to the prince and said he was only waiting for his order. He had made a wise decision, and only he, His Highness, could become the next king. He began shouting that he was in a separate palace and that they should leave no witnesses. They must kill everyone, guards and servants, without exception. The subordinate told him, His Highness, and he began shouting, what? If he had something to say, he should speak quickly. The man replied no, he was just a little nervous. A moment later, Van burst in, grinning and apologizing for interrupting their conversation. He was the second prince, right? The prince exclaimed in fear and shouted, who is he, and how dare he enter here? The subordinate prince assumed that a pesky rat had gotten in, and a moment later, decided to start a fight. He leaped into the air and pounced on Van, when suddenly, through those red eyes, he realized that in this sacred kingdom, there was only one filthy, inferior race devoid of magic. A Galda without a mage. That's what he'd tell him. Cheap tricks wouldn't work on him. He gripped his weapon tighter and pounced on the protagonist, who easily parried his attack. The boy fell to the floor, and the prince screamed, how could this be? How could he have done that with a fist devoid of magic? It was a fatal blow to the head. Van explained that if he struck the bridge of the nose at the right angle, bone fragments would pierce the brain, and then it wouldn't matter whether the person had magic or not. They would still die like any other person. After that, he looked sharply into his eyes and the wizard decided to run up to him. He cast a special spell and began to fight, when suddenly a jaw-silencing spell was cast, and the young man screamed in horrific, piercing pain. The protagonist had dislocated his upper jaw, and now he couldn't cast the spell, so he should surrender. The mage was angry that he was mocking him, because he didn't need spells to kill him. When he aimed at the protagonist, he immediately confused him and said that he had already warned him. Could he really be a swordsman and a mage at the same time? The prince fell to the floor, screaming that it was impossible without magic. Van asked again, but why was he so surprised? There was no rule that said they couldn't win without magic, right? The prince angrily shouted that he was the mercenary Heinz, and Van replied that he was an assassin, not a mercenary, and that he was here at his friend's request. He was dumbfounded with horror and screamed, don't make him laugh. He couldn't possibly be a friend of the royal family. He's just cattle, not magical scum. When Van heard this, he said nothing, and the prince asked how much he'd paid him. Let him tell him now, and he'd pay him double, even triple. A moment later, his blood was spilled, and the prince was destroyed. Van said after a long silence that they weren't cattle. The second prince's death was attributed to illness. The funeral was held with due honors, and the long palace intrigues came to an end. Sometime later, Heinz was sitting in his study reading a book when he suddenly felt a rustle and saw Van sitting on his windowsill and apologizing. Heinz smiled, then they went out onto the balcony, and he said he'd done an excellent job with his brother. Now he would definitely become the next king. Van congratulated him on this event and asked how it felt to fulfill his long-held dream. Heinz asked again, what was he talking about? This is where their dream begins. He vows once again that when he ascends to the throne, he will abolish the laws that discriminate against the Galda, a non-magical race. He will no longer allow them to call him cattle. Van smiled and believed that he would keep his word, his friend. After this conversation, they shook hands, and Heinz asked, by the way, he will come to the coronation, right? Van replied that if a Galda appears in such a place, he will be thrown out. Heinz told them not to worry, because he will not allow that. He will be king after all. Van appreciated his concern, but he should not create problems for himself immediately after ascending the throne. Changing people's minds takes time, and he can wait. Heinz understood everything and thanked them for their concern. At that moment, he looked at the sky and realized, right, maybe he should return home for now? The days of battle are behind him, and he wants to rest. Van smiled and said that this was a good idea. He would do so. Heinz confirmed this and said to spend time with his family. Sometime later, the protagonist returned home and began to wash himself. His body bore many battle scars. He picked up a lantern and went into the room, where he looked around. There, he saw a special open book and many wooden objects. He asked, is the battle really over? One day, he and Heinz were discussing in nature that since he had no magic, he couldn't be detected. Falling in love was certainly an advantage, but the enemies they would have to fight were the greatest magicians in the kingdom. Magical swordsmen and magic warriors. Could he defeat countless magic masters? Van replied that he would learn magic then too. Heinz was surprised and said he no longer had magical power, and Van replied that he would know more about magic than anyone in this world. He would hone his fighting skills to surpass them. That's all, he smiled, looking at Heinz, who answered clearly, that's just like him. At that moment, he grabbed the book and said that it had truly been a long battle. When a new day dawned, the protagonist, wearing a cloak, walked into the city market, and a vendor shouted welcome to him. Let him come and look at this. The nearest southern fruit had just arrived from the ship. He thought about how rare this was. He hadn't been home in a long time. Maybe he should buy a treat. He remembered his sister and thought that she'd always loved them and would probably cry with joy. This thought made him smile, and he said he'd take one of those fruits. The vendor replied, Of course, dear customer, just 1 copper coin. Van suddenly froze, and the vendor started yelling, damn it. Let him get out of here. Doesn't he see that they don't sell gold? At that moment, the protagonist pulled out another coin, and when the vendor reached for it, he pulled his hand away and asked, so, is he selling it to him or not? What's wrong? The surrounding vendors began whispering that it was a Galda. Why was it wandering so calmly through the capital? They shouldn't come near, or the curse of losing magic would come. Van, hearing these words, thought about how it couldn't be infected. The only time in the world where magic was lost was when the Galda were a non-magical race. The ancient kings rebelled, threatening to turn the Galda, a magical race, into mere cattle for the Alcasol magical race. Creating class distinctions based on magical power, the magical race exploits non-magical power and uses them for dangerous work and as cannon fodder in war. Only taxes are equal for everyone. When discontent with the monarchy and social tension grows, it begins with the massacre of non-magical races. They simply turn a blind eye. All the troubles in this country are due to the cursed race and the Galda. A convenient way for the monarchy to let off steam. He is simply sick of it. The anxiety remains. Will the day come when everyone in the village can live with a smile? Suddenly, he saw a little girl yelling at her friends to wait and running after them. But suddenly, she tripped and fell on her face, hitting herself and starting to cry, losing a tooth. Van was scared for her, put the bag down, and went to help her. He asked if she was hurt. The girl rose to her feet and said that his eyes were red. Van confirmed this, and the girl said how beautiful those eyes were. He was dumbfounded when he heard this, as he hadn't expected it at all, and the girl screamed thank you as she ran away. Van replied, please, they were all human, and someday the Galda and the magical race would definitely unite like they had with Heinz. This country could be changed, or rather, they would definitely change it, and everything was just beginning. When night fell, he realized he had been too late. He hadn't been here for 10 years, hadn't he? I wonder if they would even be happy to see him? One day, before he left his home, his mother said she didn't know where he was going to work, but when he returned, he should bring his wife. He asked in surprise, what? His sister Rena shouted, yeah, brother, he should introduce her to them before the wedding. He grabbed her cheek and said he was going to work there. Since he'd made up his mind, he should give it his all. But if things got tough, he could always come home. That's exactly what his mother had said. And Rena confirmed that when he returned, she would cook his favorite mushroom soup. He should take care of himself and be careful. After that, she gave him a necklace as a keepsake. They hugged him, and the protagonist looked at the necklace he was currently holding. As he approached the village, he saw everything burning. He was dumbfounded by the horror he'd experienced and exclaimed, what? Is this a fire? Is everything okay? He ran into the village and started screaming, is it him, Van? Is everyone okay? Where are they? Van saw many dead people and tried to help them, asking if they were okay. When he saw serious bleeding wounds, he realized that something terrible was happening here. He turned around and saw hanged people. When he looked at them, he saw that many dead people and girls were lying next to them and screamed, what's going on? Were they attacked by bandits? But why would they have gone so far? He thought about his dear mother and Rena and realized that they were not here. He begged them to please be alive. He did everything for the two of them. That's why he continued to fight. He wanted to make this country a place where his mother and Rena could live happily. When he approached the house, he saw that his mother was hanged from a rope on a tree. He was dumbfounded and looked, is it really her? When he came closer, he turned her body over and saw her murdered face. He cried out in horror and screamed that this simply couldn't be happening. Suddenly, the protagonist heard Rena calling him. He turned around and saw that she was covered in blood. Then she tried to sit up, and he yelled at her to hold on. He picked her up and asked, what the hell? She was yelling at him to run, not to hunt him, brother. Van was dumbfounded and asked, what does that mean? Are these the remnants of the second prince's faction? That can't be happening. He replied, okay, let her not say another word. He went to his sister and said he would take her to a safe place. Her blood continued to drip, and he became very scared, causing the girl to start screaming loudly and say she had become a very good cook. Van asked, what is she talking about now? She said she wanted him to try her soup, brother. He looked in horror at his dying sister, tears streaming down her face, and she grabbed his face and told him not to blame himself. It wasn't his fault. She died after that. Van was shocked and incredibly angry when suddenly someone pierced him from behind, stronger than ever. Blood splashed out, and the knights shouted that this was just wonderful. As expected of the royal knights, Van, the leader of the rebel army, had killed him. The knights shouted with joy, and one of them said that he was still standing. Van turned around, and the knight asked permission to ask him what he had just received. He didn't come back on purpose, right? Van replied that now none of those he wanted to protect were left alive. The knight screamed, of course not. He would let him die without suffering. Van asked again, why should they die? Who ordered this? His Highness? The knight replied, no, it is the sacred decree of His Majesty Heinz. Gald are not needed in this country. Van became angry and started shouting, don't lie to him. He would never give such an order. At that moment, Heinz himself came out to him on the battlefield and asked, is everything ready? He turned to Van and said he'd been waiting a long time and was tired of waiting. He bought souvenirs, hadn't he, since he'd been away for so long? Van shook with fear and terror and tried to ask why he'd done that. Heinz asked again, why? It was all his fault, Van. Assassins capable of bypassing magical detection and infiltrating anywhere are those who can kill mages with brute force. And the Galda that created them, they were both a threat that could disrupt the peace of their country. Therefore, they had to be destroyed. The protagonist began to scream in anger that he'd deceived him. and Heinz replied that he always keeps his word. From now on, discrimination against Galda would be erased from this kingdom, along with their very existence. Van screamed, "Don't make him laugh," when suddenly the knight attacked him from behind again, but Van immediately turned around and caught his sword with his bare hands. Van screamed that he would kill him, Heinz. At that moment, all the knights tensed, and Heinz replied that he truly was a monster. He then used his magical powers, and the knights cried out to protect his majesty. A moment later, all the knights were engaged, and Van rushed into battle. He used secret arts and Shadow Galda. This is the final bloom. A moment later, everything around lit up with a bright flash of light, and Heinz cast a spell that pierced the protagonist. After some time, the knights lay motionless. Van looked at Heinz, who said that even now he was fighting to protect the corpse. This is so typical of him. Even dying, he refuses to bow. What a hopeless and stubborn fool he is. Van remained standing, and at that moment, Heinz bid him farewell, for he was too strong. When the protagonist fell to the ground, he realized that when he woke up after such a long sleep, he would not let it end here. His revenge isn't over yet, and he has no choice but to give him another chance. Next time, he'll make things more pleasant for him. After a while, he opened his eyes and saw his house. He looked at his hands and wondered if he was still alive. Where was he? Why did this place seem familiar? At that moment, his sister Rena came to him and said he was finally awake. He screamed in surprise. "Is she still alive?" Rena asked him what he was saying. "Isn't he awake yet?" Van didn't understand. Maybe he was sleeping? She told him to go wash up. His mother was preparing a celebratory dinner. He asked again, "What do you mean celebratory?" She shouted, "Surely he knows it's his birthday." His mother also came up to him and told him for sure. Let him come to his senses. He's 15 now. When Van heard this, he was dumbfounded, because he realized it had happened 10 years ago. When the protagonist went outside, he saw his family shaking the blanket. He didn't understand what was happening, and Mom said it was a sin to stay home on a day like this, right? They set up a picnic, and Rena remarked on the wonderful weather. Van didn't understand, but had he really just been sleeping this whole time? Suddenly, a strong wind picked up, and Rena closed her eyes. Many leaves blew past them, and Van felt something was wrong. He looked at his hand, catching one, and Rena was surprised. He realized no, it was all real. He still remembered all the tricks he'd learned. The smell of burning in the city, Rena's last words, and the pain in his chest where it had pierced him. All of this screamed that it was real. Rena asked if something had happened. He answered no, nothing. And Mom suggested they get started, because almost everything was ready. It smelled delicious. Rena wished him a happy birthday, and so they celebrated together. Several knights were riding through the forest on horseback, and one of the girls was surprised to think of encountering a heretic hunt. The knight apologized and said they couldn't find any other mages of rank A or higher, and the girl asked, "What are the knights doing?" If civilians were harmed, they would be accused of negligence. He said they shouldn't worry about it, since what lay ahead was the autonomous region of Galda. The girl was surprised by this, and the knight asked again, "She learned this at the Magic Academy, right? They're not citizens, they're beasts." The girl silently looked into his eyes, and he said that in any case, they should hurry. The main character ate delicious food, and said the taste was very familiar. His mother asked, "Didn't she cook this for him just recently?" He screamed, "That's how much he loves it." Rena hugged him and said she helped cook too, and Van said, "I understand. No wonder all the pieces are different sizes." Rena screamed at him for being a bastard, and his mother sneered at them. Van looked at his mother and sister, wondering if he'd really gone back 10 years in time. So he'd been given a chance to fix everything, but what should he do now? At that moment, his mother turned to him and asked if he was still worried about it. He was surprised and realized, yes, Gald boys choose their path at 15, and without a father or family business, he had 3 options. The first was to take a low-paying job in the city, leave the city for hard, dangerous work, and endure disdain, or become a mercenary. They don't have magic, but many possess incredible physical strength, and since they're undetectable by magic, they make excellent scouts. When kingdoms war with their neighbors, Gald mercenaries are the first to be sent to the front lines, and they end up being mere cannon fodder for the army. And if they survive, they're promised a large reward. His mother hugged her son and said she wasn't saying being a mercenary was bad. They were only eating today because of his father's good fortune on the battlefield. But he was her only son. The mortality rate among mercenaries was high, and yet many chose this path to survive. In a past life, he disobeyed his mother and became a mercenary. And that's when he met Heinz. When they exchanged glances in the past, that's how they met. Suddenly, they heard a loud ringing bell. It was an alarm, and Van couldn't understand how he could have forgotten about it. Rena asked what was going on. He started shouting at them to leave the city, and Mother jumped up from her seat and said, "Wait, where was he running?" Many mages gathered around the shackled people and shouted that the gods had commanded it. Filth was a sin. Their sacred blood should be forbidden, but their kingdom hid the despicable filth called Galda. Dirt is born from darkness, and it calls for darkness. These were the Purifiers, a fundamentalist group within the main religion of the Mage Kingdom. Their ideology was so radical that even the church labeled them heretics. One of their core beliefs was that the Galda were minions of the devil and must be exterminated. On his 15th birthday, the Purifiers were declared heretics, and the exiled capitals fled to the Galda Autonomous Region. This city, of course, had no competent security. These people easily took over the city and committed all sorts of atrocities in the name of purification. At that time, He could only hide with his family, but not this time. He rushed to defend it and climbed through the walls straight up into the building. When the mages decided to purify the city and lit a fire, one of the men told the girl not to be afraid. The purifying flame would absolve them of their sins. The girl screamed in fear, and at that moment, the protagonist fell upon him from above. The main tactic in combat against a mage is a surprise attack that the enemy can't perceive. The primary targets are the brain, neck, or spinal cord. Hit one of these and they'll die before they can cast a spell. When he attacked the lead purifier, he fell unconscious, and everyone exchanged surprised glances. An awkward silence fell between them, and no one knew what to do. At that moment, all the mages turned and looked at him in fear. Just like ordinary people. The protagonist stood meekly, and they grew angry and began shouting. What did he do? But before his opponent could finish speaking, Van stabbed him in the chest with his sword. The man's blood spilled, and he died instantly. Only an enchanted weapon can penetrate a magical barrier. He didn't have one, so he simply used the enemies. At that moment, the mage began to attack him and cast a spell, but the protagonist was able to dodge the attack and attack another mage standing behind him. He cried out in horror, and Van realized there were only 3 of them left. At that moment, someone shouted at him to stop. It was the mage holding the hostage and told him to kneel. Do as he says, or this woman will die. Van cursed and realized there were more of them beyond the square, and said that this was unfair. If he gave in, they would kill her anyway. He asked, didn't he feel sorry for her at all? He drew his sword and told the girl that if she wanted to blame someone, she should see this boy. Van shouted at him to wait, and said that this should be enough, right? He raised his hands, and the man, smiling, said that this should have been the case from the very beginning. He called the others, and at that moment they pounced on Van, shouting at him to get what he deserved. He fell to the ground and curled up into a ball. The mages came closer and started shouting, "Little freak! How dare he mess with them? Let him get it now, and that too." When they kicked him, one of the mages said enough of this and let him finish him off. Another asked, what is he talking about? He'd killed their comrades and shouldn't make him suffer. Someone exclaimed, no, that boy, there's something he doesn't like about him. He needs to be killed now, or else it will be bad. The boy asked again, what is he talking about? He told him to move away, because he'd do it himself, and then cast a freeze spell. Everyone was stunned with horror and started screaming. What the hell is this? It turned out that the same girl who had arrived from the carriage had asked him to stop twitching. She wouldn't know how to fix it if it broke. The fun is over, fanatics. In the name of royal justice, they are under arrest. The boys shouted, reinforcements from the capital. Van also didn't understand what was happening, because in his past life, reinforcements from the capital took much longer to get here. They didn't understand why they were standing there. They should kill this woman, every single one of them, but none of the mages could move, thanks to Helena, who had already said it was over. She shouted for them to disarm them, and the boys responded, I understand. After a while, she approached Van, who looked at her questioningly and said he'd eliminated 3 purification mages. He silently looked into her eyes and she smirked, saying she was counting that for him. He asked what that meant. Helena replied that the pyromaniac lying there dead could have burned the entire city to the ground if he wanted, and frankly, she didn't know how to handle it. It wasn't that she couldn't defeat him. She just wanted to avoid unnecessary destruction. But his ambush had succeeded, and he'd been a great help. Van wondered if killing him meant the kingdom was reacting faster now. She replied that in any case, what did he want as a reward? Van said he didn't need anything. It wasn't him, but he who had been saved, and he thanked her for it. Helena offered him her hand and said that Gald had funny children. What was his name? Van offered her his hand and told her his name. Helena answered clearly and also told him hers. Let him tell her if he wanted to enroll in the Magic Academy. He asked again, what did that mean? He stood there, perplexed for a moment, unsure what to say. Helena explained that it was a boarding school founded by the kingdom. Its purpose was to gather talent, and even commoners and foreigners could enroll if they passed the exam. He knew the name, and had often heard it in his past life. Among the warriors and magicians renowned as heroes, many of them would have been academy graduates. He asked again, but why him? Helena looked into his eyes and asked to speak privately. She took his hand and led him aside, and Van didn't understand where they were going. She replied, who knows, he will be her guide. She was new to this village and smiled. Van smiled back and followed her. When they arrived at a secluded spot, Helena asked, is this a quiet place? Van answered, as she wanted, no one would hear them here. She confirmed that it was true. Such a place is ideal for assassination, isn't it? At that moment, she created a magic circle and aimed her arrow at him. Van was dumbfounded with horror, and Helena had already cast a spell to destroy her opponent, when suddenly Van appeared behind her. She was surprised. Was this instantaneous movement magic? No, she didn't feel any spell. It was a pure physical technique. He moved out of her line of sight and ended up in her blind spot. He grabbed her hand and said, stop pretending. She didn't understand what this performance was about. He said he didn't feel any killing intent, and Helena grinned and said that he spoke like a seasoned warrior. What kind of life had he lived at his age? He asked again, so she was testing him? Helena replied that it was her nature, and she had to see everything with her own eyes, and he actually had the strength to fight mages with technique alone. He asked again, so what? Helena replied that she knew it sounded unexpected, but an idea had occurred to her, and that thought meant that perhaps he could change Gald's fate. Van was dumbfounded by what he heard, and she was saying that if he entered the academy, everything would happen. He asked again, "Isn't that so? A knighthood grant?" She replied that he knew, exactly. With his skills, he could become a candidate for a knighthood grant from the academy. A knighthood grant is a system that rewards academy students for outstanding achievements. Regardless of the candidate's origin, the right to found a new noble family in the kingdom is granted. The granted lands are usually located where the candidate was born, and in his case, that would almost certainly be Gald's city. He was dumbfounded and horrified. It wasn't that he'd never thought about it, but unlike before, he was still too young to take the entrance exam. But at that moment, he looked up and said he had 3 questions. Helena smiled and replied that she was listening. They sat down opposite each other, and he said the first question for the entrance exam required a recommendation from a noble, correct? She replied, "Of course, and she'll give it to you." He silently looked into her eyes, and Helena was glad he was excited about the idea. What was his next question? He replied that a man without magic like himself was receiving a scholarship at a magic school, and that sounded ridiculous. What would she say about that? She answered truly, and he remained silent. Helena added that those who had received scholarships in the past, defying all tradition, all had one thing in common. They were discovering new principles of magic. Building magical potions, studying magic circles, and using magic aren't the only principles of magic. Defeating a mage without using magic, there's no reason his path can't lead to a noble title. If he can get everyone to acknowledge his power, then everything will work out. Van replied that he didn't fully understand, but she was saying it was possible, and that it all depended on him. Helena confirmed that was the case. Van said that his final question was, what was her goal? She looked him in the eye, and Van asked what she would make him do once he received the noble title. When he asked, Helena replied, he doesn't trust her. He replied that he simply wanted to know what she would gain from him becoming Lord of Gald. She remained silent and said that she really would get something out of it, but she couldn't tell him what exactly. Van got angry, and there was silence between them. Suddenly, his sister ran up to him and shouted, "What is he doing here?" He said nothing, and Rena asked again, "What do you mean nothing?" She heard everything. He was fighting bad guys. Van scratched his head and apologized for worrying her. "He's fine, so everything's fine." She hugged him and shouted, "Brother, he always says he's fine, and then does something reckless again." She and her mother were very worried about him. She continued to stand and hug him, and at that moment, Helena looked at them silently, then said that he might not trust her, but by accepting her offer, he would ultimately earn the right to protect his sister and family. She swears on her name, Helena Steinertz, that's for sure. After these words, she walked away, and the protagonist looked at his sister and became thoughtful. The next days flew by. When his mother learned that he had fought the purifiers, she was very upset. She asked how he could have done that, but when she heard the townspeople thank him for his help, she said that he really was just like his father and had done an excellent job. She patted his head and smiled. They also talked about the academy, and when his mother heard this, she exclaimed, "The capital's academy?" He replied that it seemed they even took Galda there. He told them about the reward, the recommendation, and his decision. Rena exclaimed, "But there are mostly only Alkire people there, right?" He confirmed that this was precisely why he wanted to show them what Galda was capable of. Rena was dumbfounded and looked at him silently, afraid for her brother. Van said that they were no worse and pondered for several days, but could not find a new way to save everyone. In his past life as an assassin, he had a point, since he was working in concert with the heir to the throne. But in this life, he won't cooperate, and without a clear plan, he can't take over the kingdom alone. He doesn't know Helena's true intentions, but if he accepts her offer, it could truly open a new path. He's already died once, so even if the path is dangerous, if there's even the slightest hope, he'll take it. He wants to eradicate discrimination against Gald in this country. His mother and sister were dumbfounded by his decision, and his mother was completely horrified. She said it seemed like even if she said no, he wouldn't listen. Van asked if she forgave him. She replied that even if she told him to stop, he still wouldn't listen, right? He got this stubbornness from his father, and she smiled, and he thanked her for those words. But when she sat down at the table, she asked, by the way, if he'd thought about how he was going to pay for admission and tuition. The academy isn't free, in case he wasn't aware. He realized he hadn't thought about it at all, and his mother replied that nothing could be done about it. Everything was fine, and she'd figure out something about the money. Rena exclaimed that she would work too and help him. The protagonist raised his trembling hand and forbade them to stop, as he couldn't force them. But could he earn that much money on his own? There were no high-paying jobs in Galda, but the money problem was solved surprisingly easily. He had a bag of gold, brought by Helena especially for him. The protagonist asked again, "What's that?" She replied that it was a reward for defeating a faction. And that feeling, hadn't she told him? When he began to say goodbye to his family, his mother told him something. He would be treated poorly in the capital simply because he was from Galda, and he would have to endure a lot. But he mustn't let this break him. He must live with his head held high. He was his mother's pride and joy. Van smiled and said he would try to do it, and Rena exclaimed that when he returned, he would prepare his favorite mushroom soup. He thanked her for this, patted her on the head, and said that he would look forward to this moment. Well, now he was leaving. His sister and mother saw him off and waved after him. This time he would definitely keep his promise. When the protagonist arrived at the right place, he was stunned by the scale. So this is what the academy was like. When he entered, he saw the school students. One of the guys introduced himself to the guard and said that his father recommended him. The knight bowed and said yes, please let him in. The next girl was Elizabeth, recommended by Duchess Krausberg. The guard bowed again and said it was an honor to meet her, please let her in. The protagonist was next, and when he approached, the guard started shouting, what the hell is he doing here? Van got scared and everyone started discussing. They won't let the Gald in, will they? Why did the academy need a Gald? The protagonist thought about it, thinking it was just as he'd thought. He'd said he wouldn't do anything to them. He just wanted to submit an application. The knight screamed. Did he even understand what he was asking for? He asked again. This is the academy, right? He'd heard that a Gald could get in if he passed the exam. The guard started yelling at him for being a freak and threatening to put a spear to his throat. Stop talking nonsense. Van was stunned and realized he'd made a bad move. Controlling these forces wasn't a problem, but if he made a fuss here, there would be no time for the exam. At that moment, another guard approached him and asked him to stop. There couldn't be any bloodshed in front of the applicants. He chuckled, and the protagonist asked, have they calmed down yet? The guard said that upstarts like him crop up every year. Van looked at him silently, thinking, what a shame. The guard leaned towards his face and said, listen up, boy. He wouldn't even be allowed to take the exam without a noble recommendation. He replied that he had one, and the knight asked again, what? He replied that he had a letter of recommendation, and it even had the royal seal on it. When the guard saw this, he started shouting, what nonsense? How dare he defame the royal family? Let him give it here. Forging the royal seal is a serious crime. Van looked at him silently, then threw his hand aside, sending the guard crashing into the stone wall. The second guard looked at him in fear, as did all the surrounding students. The guard asked why he was suddenly falling. No one had noticed the protagonist do it because of his physical speed. The guard said something was wrong with that guy. At that moment, the professor approached her and asked what all that noise was about. It was the examiner, and the guards bowed to him and said everything was fine. It was just that guy who caught their attention. When the examiner turned to Van, he introduced himself and stated his name. He was recommended by Helena Steiners. Everyone around him was stunned when they heard her name, and the examiner opened the letter in surprise. He said it was literally her seal. After that, he asked him to proceed, and everyone was surprised. Could this really be a recommendation from House Steiners itself? Is that who he is? Van looked around and realized that everyone was reacting to him strangely, and apparently Helena really was some kind of important person. When he entered the academy, he looked around and realized everything is clear. All the elite had gathered here. There was the swordsman Dietrich, and things would get more interesting. He saw the Arch Kyle, the Lord of Fire, and the Divine Saint Lunaris, so they had also entered this academy. Fate had brought him together with these people again. They were royal knights who fought on the battlefield, but in the struggle for the royal treasure, they became mere pawns in the hands of the prince, and he killed them all one day. In this life, he will take his place in the sun and become someone they won't even dare look at. Isn't that exciting? If he goes all the way, he could even change the kingdom. At that moment, one of the guys pointed a finger at him and shouted, the red-eyed one. Van turned around and asked again, was he saying that to him? He answered yes to him. Why was he so calm? He replied that he stood wherever he wanted, right? The guy said he was rude. Did he even understand who he was? Van remembered that in his past life, it had always been like this, and perhaps it would have been easier for him to bow his head, but he remembered his mother's words, that he didn't need to become outstanding. Let him live with dignity. In his past life, there was someone who had said the same thing to him. If he bowed his head even once, the day would never come when he could achieve equality. Let him live with dignity, Van, his friend. It was Heinz in the past, but now the guy kept yelling at him. Was he even listening to him? He pushed Van away, causing him to get angry and say he'd gone first. The guy was surprised by this reaction, and after a moment, Van smiled and pulled the guy onto his knees. Execution is a technique that allows you to not only give the opponent death, but also their movements and take control of them. This is exactly what he used on that night, and at that point, the guy simply couldn't get up. Van decided to feign innocence and asked if he could get up. He wanted to help him and offered his hand. The guy jumped up abruptly, but when he yanked his hand, someone shouted, let him stay where he is. The people around him watched from the sidelines, and Van was surprised. It turned out to be Heinz, who came out to him and said, the people of Gald are also allies of the kingdom, and they must be united. The boy bowed and said it was an honor, and Heinz replied, no need to stand on ceremony. Today he's an examinee like everyone else. So please, let him treat him like an ordinary person, and he, too. Van realized that he had already entered the academy this year. He realized it was the 9th prince, and the people around him were discussing how if he joked, he would be considered a nuisance. This was quite fair, of course. Even Gald was wary. What a prince, he came out to him. He remembered Heinz asking, he'd been there before, right? The protagonist didn't understand why he remembered this now, and Heinz said with a smile that he seemed nervous. Honestly, he, too. The academy entrance exams are quite an event, but he shouldn't worry. He's suggesting that, like his opponents, they simply show off their best. He offered him his hand, and the protagonist realized that with such a smile, anyone would seem to relax and open up. So warm. but he knows what lies behind that smile, his true nature. Right now, he could definitely kill him, but what if he killed him here? He shouldn't forget why he came to the academy. At that moment, he clenched his fist and Heinz asked again, perplexed, what was wrong with him? Heinz told him to leave him alone and turned around, declaring that he had no intention of getting close to anyone. Heinz looked after him in surprise and lowered his hand. Those around him were surprised. How dare he speak to the prince like that? He has no manners. Galda, he truly is a beast. The guy he fought got angry and started shouting quietly at everyone, and the examiner announced that this was the end of applications for the exam. Now they were escorted to the test site. It would be in the misty forest. All the boys tensed and waited. After a while, when they arrived at the right place, the examiner announced, "Attention applicant, welcome to the forest. This year's exam would be held here." And as they knew, the academy had been granted the rare right to use the kingdom's sacred lands, and they didn't have time to train those who didn't even have the basics from scratch. Therefore, they must demonstrate at least minimal abilities. The Misty Forest is a place where the very earth is imbued with magic, and their task is to find and bring back a heavenly tear flower that has absorbed the forest's magic. The animals here are also imbued with magic, so they must be prepared for anything. Van thought this was a strange exam, with them fighting monsters right away. The rules say that interfering with others is forbidden, but helping each other is allowed. But to pass the tests, everyone will need their own heavenly tear flower. If they gather in a large group, there won't be enough flowers for everyone. They have until sunset. Before entering the forest, each of them will receive a protective sign. If they find themselves in danger, they must show this sign, and the examiner will come to their aid. But anyone who asks for help is immediately eliminated from the exam. So the exam begins, and they can enter the forest as soon as they are ready. One of the guys took the girl's hand and asked permission to protect her. It would be an honor for him. She smiled, very pleased. The other guys also dispersed and asked each other, wouldn't it be a shame for him to give up such a partner? Another replied that he was in his element. Van was left completely alone and realized that this was all leading up to it. It'll be easier alone. When he approached for the badge, the man looked at him silently and handed it over. Van walked alone, and his opponent watched him with a smile. When Van entered the forest, he saw the first beast and said, "This one looks like a mid-level magical beast." Animals imbued with powerful magic are called magic beasts. A magic beast is one whose body has been strengthened by magic, sometimes more dangerous than others. Since becoming an assassin, he had only fought humans, and at that moment, he pounced on the monster and used a destructive strike, a technique used to kill magic beasts. This isn't just brute force. The strike is delivered directly to the magical field, the shockwave from which passes through any defense and strikes the target from within. If the enemy is alert, such a strike will be difficult to land, but against a dumb beast, it will be just right. A moment later, the monster fell to the ground, and he reflected that during his mercenary days, he had encountered monsters with similar beasts before. It was a shame, of course, but he turned around and saw that they were watching him. He scratched the back of his head, and the guys didn't understand what he had just done. He must have slipped poison. That's just the spirit of those filthy Galda. Against his magic, such cheap tricks wouldn't work. His partner asked if he was really going there. After all, his sister had forbidden him. He replied that it was all an excuse. The examiners weren't going to let this Gald through. He even dared to be rude to the prince. So even if he killed him, no one would say a word. After some time, a guard led the man to the right room and asked him to go in. He said fine, let him give him the key. The knight asked again, was he serious about this? He replied that there was no need to worry, it was under magical control. His only target was that degenerate who dared to appear for the entrance exam. This boy was a Gald. After that, the academy couldn't turn away an applicant with a recommendation. But if he somehow passed the exam, it would damage the academy's reputation. Usually, such applicants have accidents. The knight asked, what if he hurt someone else? The man replied that it wasn't a problem, since this Galda always acted alone, and it was unlikely that anyone would approach him voluntarily. At that moment, he unlocked the door and told the damned beast to come out, deal with this filthy Galda, and defend the honor of the academy. When the examiner looked up at the sky, he realized it was the exam this year, and he had a bad feeling. That same academy member approached him and asked if there had been any anomalies. He replied that everything was going smoothly so far. But where had he been during the test? He replied that he was preparing for what would happen next. There was still a little time left. The examiner suspected something was wrong and remained silent. When Van went out into the forest, he saw that very flower. This was the flower of heavenly tears. He decided to pick it, return, and then the exam would be passed. But first he asked the guys if they were coming out already. They started talking, and wow, he noticed them. Galda, does he have a nose like a dog? He replied, no, it's just experience. Cowards always stab you in the back. Although they weren't supposed to talk about it to him, a former assassin. One of the guys said he couldn't act tough anymore. He had no place at the academy, and they would prove it to him now. Van replied, stop pretending. They just want revenge for what he'll take in public. That's all. It was petty pride, and he would quickly put them in their place. His opponent grew angry and shouted that he would never forgive him, and at that moment, Van realized they were mage wielders working in tandem. So what should he do? There are three main fighting styles that utilize magic. The most common is releasing magic in the form of spells. The second is infusing magic into a weapon, such as a sword. The third is strengthening the body by concentrating magic within oneself. That's a mage fighter. Combining different styles is a good way to cover each other's weaknesses. The guy passed out and said it seemed they'd never killed, but at least they had the resolve. However, he couldn't kill them. The death of some Gald would be chalked up to an accident during an exam. But if the youngest son of an aristocrat died, his entire family would rush to find the killer and seek revenge. The outer nobles, who lost their masters in the war, still lived by the laws of troubled times, and he had already decided that this time he would take the bright path. He would no longer kill anyone, and yet force them to admit defeat. His opponent's face twisted, and he said he didn't like the look in his eyes. Gald, the freak, he used the dancing blade, the sky cleaver. The protagonist fled and the guy asked, did he dodge a fatal blow? He had good intuition. He asked again, a blade of wind, right? He shouted that it was sky splitter magic, a wall trike technique. For someone who couldn't see magic, it was an invisible blade. The boy asked again, were he scared? If he wanted honor, he should kneel. And Van said, perhaps he didn't happen to supply wind to the palace? When he asked this, the opponent became very angry and shouted that he would destroy him right then and there, and then, shouting the storm's sky splitter spell, he struck Van, who easily managed to get back up, and Van wondered how he could see it. Van wondered if he was so consumed by the lust for murder that he could see everything. At that moment, he destroyed his opponent by punching him in the stomach, and the boy began coughing in pain and terror. His friend decided to intercede and, holding out his sword, asked, how dare he? The protagonist thought that it was an ordinary magical weapon, and until he touched the blade, it was just a sword. But it wasn't as simple as it seemed. Usually, the tip of a sword moves 2 or 3 times faster than a fist. However, Van, with his lightning-fast strike, controlled not the sword, but his opponent's wrist. So he twisted his opponent's arm and forced him face first onto the ground. When the boy fell, he screamed in pain, and his opponent muttered, no. He asked, do you want to continue? If this was going to happen, he wouldn't hold back. The boy was terrified and began to apologize. He'd been wrong and was begging for forgiveness. Van asked him to wait, but at that moment, he looked away. He had a strange feeling and suddenly realized they had to leave immediately. A huge beast appeared right in front of him. The boys were frightened, and at that moment, the monster knocked them aside with the first blow. They fell to the ground in great pain, and Van also didn't understand what was happening. He looked questioningly at the creature, which began attacking and running at them again. The boys trembled, saying that this couldn't be happening. Where did such a high-level monster come from? The monster growled, and Van realized that it was preparing for the next attack. It was a helm-borer magic beast, also known as a cursed fang. This creature's charge, enhanced by destructive magic, is comparable to a siege weapon. Van told the boys that if they could move, they should flee immediately. The boys insisted that it was impossible because of the charge. The protagonist turned around and saw the boy lift his ankle and say that most likely his bone had cracked and he couldn't stand. What should they do? He became afraid for the boys and realized he needed to run with him in his arms. No, slowing down before such an attack would mean certain death. And besides, magical beasts relentlessly pursue their chosen target. If he broke the badge and called for backup, how long would it take them to get there? He told him to abandon it. It was better for them to save themselves. He was, after all, from the Waltrike family and could manage somehow. His friends smiled and said not to talk nonsense. Abandoning his comrades and running away would bring shame on the Eisenbach family. While they were exchanging these pleasant words, Van told him to touch the badge and call for backup, and he would help buy time until they arrived. The guy replied that if he failed the exam because of this, he would dishonor his family, and the other said yes, he would only put the family's honor on the line. They were better off fighting and dying in this case. Van clutched his head and muttered, what cheap pride? They asked again, what did he say, you freak? If he was going to fight, then let him fight to win. He turned around and shouted that this was the pride of the royal nobility. The boy exclaimed, damn it, he's a cheeky boy, and the three of them found themselves facing this ominous beast. Meanwhile, the professor looked up and smiled, thinking it was probably time. The examiner asked, what exactly? He replied, don't worry about it, he was just thinking. By the way, did anyone try to call for help amid all that noise? The examiner said no, everything was quiet so far. The professor smiled and said clearly, that's good. It seemed they didn't even have time to call for help. He thought about the things they took from the participants before the test began. He found his bag among them and let the beast remember its scent. He thinks he's already finished this guy off, and all that's left is to wait for the news. At that moment, he suddenly started laughing, and the examiner asked, what's going on? The guys screamed in fear that the monster was coming straight at them, and Van shouted that they would hold it off. They should attack it with all their might while they had the chance. The guys exclaimed, why is he giving orders? At that moment, the monster took its first step. Van, frightened, rushed straight at it. The guys didn't understand what was happening, and he created a karma-like destructive blow. At that moment, the protagonist slightly attacked the monster, and the guys were surprised. Karma is a technique that allows you to preempt an enemy's attack and hit a key point in its movement. All four-legged creatures move first at the neck, and Van delivered his destructive blow there. But at that moment, he found himself right next to the monster's mouth, and realized he couldn't do it. A 10-year difference. The strength and mass were no longer the same, and now the blow was not strong enough to knock this creature out. He shouted for the guys to act now, and one of them exclaimed his spell, directing his forces towards the monster. His friend also exclaimed a second spell and rushed to attack the monster, when suddenly they both froze and realized that this creature was incredibly hard and strong. Van got scared and yelled at him to duck, and a moment later, a multitude of them flew everywhere. The monster suddenly started running away, and Van, rising to his feet, turned around and realized, damn, the guys were lying nearby, not far from him. Van was glad they were still riding out, and the guy said the wind had deflected him a bit, but they wouldn't get a second chance. It looked like this was the end, since his sword had no effect on it. When Van got up, he said, okay, they have to do it again. His opponent asked, what? Van replied that next time he would finish off this monster. The guy screamed, didn't he understand? They couldn't pierce this creature's skin. Van pointed at this with his finger and said that next time he would try fusing stone shavings into the blade. Invisible blades weren't as effective. If he couldn't cut it, then let him split it, strike between the ribs, and concentrate all his magic into a single point. The guys didn't understand what he was even talking about. Van turned around and didn't answer, and the guy said he should have realized that the outcome of the fight was a foregone conclusion, but he still had strength left. If he used him as bait, he could leave without any embarrassment. But Van replied that he wasn't going to kill him. Petty revenge didn't interest him. His goal was to have his family, to have Gald recognized as part of the kingdom. He couldn't just abandon his comrades and run away. The guy was very surprised by this, and remembered how they fought him recently and exclaimed, damn. He felt sorry for how things turned out and pounced on them again. Van exclaimed that it was coming and they had to act right now. At that moment, his opponent shouted, Sword of Wind. He used these powers and struck the monster. The structure of the shoulder blade is different from a human's. It is not directly connected to the spine. The monster growled, and Van realized what he had found, and now it was his turn. He rushed straight into the attack and screamed loudly as he jumped on the monster. A quadruped's shoulder blade isn't like a human's. It's not directly attached to the spine, giving it flexibility. However, this weakens its grip under sudden impact, so he used a technique called rotational fusion. When this happened, the monster fell to the ground and began to roar, and Van yelled at the other guy to hit it, the heart at the base, with his front paw. The guy swung and screamed loudly, but before the blow, for some reason he stopped and began to grimace in fear. Suddenly, he laughed loudly, and the other guy confirmed that it had worked. Van said no, and the monster suddenly rose up and began making incredibly loud noises and roaring. A sound echoed throughout the forest, and the spell was broken. Not all magical beasts are capable of killing. The spirit beast wielding this magic swept everything away like a blast wave. The guy's hands were covered in blood, and he couldn't move. Was he bleeding internally? He looked up at the monster and realized, no, it didn't want to die. Van shielded him with his hands and shouted, Spiral combination technique. They needed to direct the blow into spirals and carry it into the ground, not take it head on. The monster growled at him again, realizing it was impossible. He couldn't take all his power. How could he use it? He didn't know what he was capable of in this body, but it was better than dying here. The boy screamed, no, but Van shouted for him to act faster and run away. They panicked and ran, while the monster growled at Van, and moments later, he was thrown aside by incredible force. When he fell to the ground, he began coughing, and his rival ran up to him, screaming his name in fear. Van shouted at him not to come any closer, and at that moment, the monster returned to kill him completely. Van tried to calm himself, because his heart had to destroy these chains. When the monster felt the tension, it abruptly stopped and fell to the ground. The creature was destroyed, and Van asked, what kind of magic was that just now? They were saved by Heinz, who said there was danger, and the boys were very surprised that it was the prince. One of them shouted that it was dangerous here, and that he should leave. Van realized that, as he thought, it was him. Heinz smiled and said that he couldn't do that, because the royal family's duty is to protect those who want to live in the kingdom. The boys were surprised by his highness, and Van realized that he always knew how to speak beautifully and touch people's hearts with his swords. And then he sent them straight to their deaths. Heinz said, well, so now they're uniting against this enemy. Van replied that he refused, and the boys turned to look at him in surprise. Heinz didn't understand what he said. Van replied that he refused. He didn't need his power. The boys shouted, he's a prince. He should watch his words. If it weren't for his majesty's will then. But before they could finish, Van replied that they were only here on missions, and if he hadn't interfered, everything would have been fine. The boys looked at him in bewilderment, and Heinz asked, does he really not need his help? Van replied, yes, and then told them to simply watch from here silently and behave as befits a royal family. The monster pounced on them again. MC warned the others, and they prepared themselves. The boy nervously clenched his teeth, hoping to land at least one blow this time, but Van immediately stopped him, because if he went, he would die in vain. Falk said he had one shot left, and MC noted that that would be enough. Let them both wait for his signal. They nodded in response, and Heinz remained in place, waiting to see what they would do. Having waited for the right moment, Van gave the boys the signal, then rushed into the attack and thought he was too hasty earlier. He He can handle it without this move. Cursed Fang swung his head, intending to strike him with its tusks, but he was able to dodge. After 3 unsuccessful attacks, the magical beast recognized Van and the others as strong opponents and switched to a more cautious attack. MC jumped aside. He knew what the monster would do next. The hook struck, he leaned over and thought with a smile that everything was going well. The gap became smaller, but he would barely be able to beat it like that. Cursed Fang screamed loudly, and it began swinging its tusks, hoping to hit him, but he dodged every time. Watching its movements, Falk exclaimed that it was simply incredible. Heinz was also surprised that it was able to develop such speed without magic. The monster roared. It rushed to attack again, and Van dodged, and Heinz thought, this is not just speed. He completely cancels his swing, moves without touching the ground, shifts his center of gravity. He's only seen this in high-ranking magical warriors. Who is he? Finally, MC goes on the attack, punching the monster in the lower jaw, then knocking it to the ground and hitting it on the top of the head with all his might. The boys were very impressed with his skills, and Heinz thought his attacks are as fierce as flames. But for such a magical beast, an attack without magic is nothing. After all, it will not work. Cursed Fang rose and growled. Heinz grew worried, and Van grinned contentedly, his goal of angering it having been achieved. Cursed Fang opened its maw wide and began to gather air, and MC immediately realized it was preparing for a devastating roar. He gave the signal to Falk, who cast a ripping wind spell, and blades of air, picking up sand, sank into the magical beast's airway. Cursed Fang screamed loudly in pain and fell backward. Van praised the boy for his efforts and ran up to the monster, then extended his arms forward for a devastating strike, a double one. The shockwave converged at a single point inside the guardian beast, like 2 ripples on water, merging to create a single, larger wave. Foam began to pour from the monster's mouth. The magical protection finally wore off, and MC turned to Ralph with a smile. He realized it was his chance, charged the blade with energy, and swung it with all his might, cutting the monster in half. Looking at his fallen opponent, he was even surprised that he had managed to do it, and Falk said in confusion he couldn't believe they had defeated the magical beast. Ralph noticed Van stomping on something and asked what he was doing, and Heinz, judging by the look on his face, was surprised. After that, MC approached Ralph, offered him his hand, and asked if he was okay. Could he move? He accepted his help and told him that he thought his insides had been beaten out, and Van explained to him it was a technique of 3 quick, magical strikes that were easy to lose control of. It looked impressive, but if repeated, he wouldn't be able to withstand it. He promised him to remember this. He had no desire to repeat the triple strike. After that, MC looked around and noticed something interesting. 2 blue flowers were growing nearby near a fallen tree. They approached it, and Heinz noticed there were only 2 flowers left. The teacher said that if they gathered in a large group, there wouldn't be enough flowers for everyone, and Van wondered, is that what he meant? What should he do? There was absolutely no time left. After that, the boys picked the flowers, one of which, of course, they gave to the prince, and MC asked discontentedly, what kind of sycophancy is this? He was just watching from the sidelines. Falk indignantly exclaimed that this was not sycophancy. For Highness, this is par for the course, and they gave him the second flower, which greatly surprised him. Falk waved his hand and told him not to misunderstand him. He just didn't want to be in his debt, and his name is not hard to remember. His name is Falk. Ralph introduced himself to him, and he looked at them both with a new look, then extended his hand and told them his name, saying it was nice to meet them. Falk shook his hand, and he asked, so if they fail the exam, they won't see each other again? The boy clicked his tongue in irritation, telling him to shut up. If they went looking now, they had a chance. Heinz told them that wasn't necessary. He walked up to the dead flowers, used his magic, and they came to life right in his hands, which surprised the boys greatly. MC asked, is this light magic? Heinz confirmed it. The flower blooms in all its glory in the rays of the sun. He gave the flowers to the boys, for which they were very grateful. Now they were not in danger of failing the exam. Van looked thoughtfully at the prince, then looked up at the sky and said that sunset was coming soon. They should hurry back. His new friends told him not to give orders here without the prince's permission, and Heinz remembered something. He called out to Van and noted that he had just covered his tracks. He didn't understand what he was getting at, and said that he had heard of such a thing. They say it's a way to cover one's tracks and an assassin's habit. The boys looked at him in surprise, and Heinz asked, is that really an assassin? That technique he demonstrated and that habit? MC remained silent, and Heinz was so wary of him because he had too many enemies. His Majesty the King strengthened his power by marrying princesses from the conquered lands. But his mother, the 5th queen, was from the local nobility. She was the first from the magical kingdom. That's why the first queen and her children are wary of him. They think their father wants to make him his heir. You never know where someone will try to kill him, so even in this exam, he decided to act alone. If Van was on their side, he needed to deal with this right now. MC, meanwhile, was extremely nervous. He himself hadn't expected his old habits to flare up again. After defeating that beast, he'd completely relaxed. To be honest, he was a former assassin, but he couldn't tell them that. So he decided to lie, feigned surprise, and looked away, asking, so these are assassin habits? Heinz immediately realized he was pretending, and he nervously clenched his teeth and declared, if that's what he thinks, so be it. After that, a wind blew through the forest. He ran toward the prince, and Falk tried to stop him, but he couldn't. He was too fast. Heinz had already prepared himself, but he simply gently touched his shoulder and said with a smile that he was joking, but that he should just stop making such a serious face. Falk was surprised, because Van had just been in front of him, and at that moment, he put his palms together and said, "He knows he speaks a little awkwardly. He is from the village, so let him not judge him too harshly." Heinz measured him with a glance, deliberately showing him weakness, but he did not fall for it. MC at this time tried to calm down. He understood that he was testing him. If he gave in to emotions, then all his training would go down the drain. The prince said that he did not care what he said. Let him better answer his question again. What was that? He's not an assassin? He spread his arms out to the sides with a smile and told him that he was recommended by a noblewoman, Helena Steinertz, and she taught him this. Since his only weapon is hand-to-hand combat, she advised him to hide his skills. He mentally apologized to Helena, and Heinz was surprised and asked, was he here on the recommendation of the Steinertz family? Ralph was also impressed. They were high nobility after all. Van scratched his head in confusion, saying he found it odd too, and Falk remarked, it wasn't arrogance, but respect. Heinz considered it. Helena Steinertz, the Ice Lady. They say she's in the top 5 at the academy, both in knowledge and strength, and he wouldn't be surprised if she understands mercenary matters. Besides, the Steinertz are an ancient family that serves the crown. They have no reason to conspire against him. Ralph inquired why the Steinertz chose him, to which MC replied, they told him they could give him a recommendation, so he agreed. Falk was surprised and asked, is that even possible? Heinz stopped suspecting him, and suggested that he had been trained since childhood to serve the king. Judging by his hand-to-hand combat skills, everything falls into place. If he had met him earlier, perhaps they would have become comrades. Van smiled wryly, thanking him for these words. And then the prince turned his gaze to the beast, and wondered who was more likely to plot against him. He said that if he had been caught by the beast alone, who knows what would have happened. Perhaps they saved his life. He bowed to them, thanking them from the bottom of his heart, and the boys became very excited and embarrassed. Ralph said that it was an honor for them, and Falk exclaimed that he hadn't actually fought for him. MC noted that he would soon be executed for such disrespect, and he indignantly pointed a finger at its face, exclaiming, did he forget what he just said? Heinz looked at him and thought, he's not trying to get to the bottom of the truth, he just wants to hurt him. This guy really is weird. Meanwhile, the students gathered at the entrance to the misty forest. Some had passed the exam, others were suffering and wondering how to justify themselves to their parents. The professor asked the guy how many were left. He said that there were 4 more, including the prince, and the man became nervous, realizing that something was wrong. What's going on there? Originally, this forest only contained animals that the prince could handle without any problem. He doesn't want him to get hurt by encountering his animal, but he still doesn't come back. Did something unexpected happen? The other students noticed someone coming out of the forest, and the man turned around worriedly, thinking it was the prince, but it turned out to be just Van. Seeing everyone looking at him, he asked, have they all come out to greet him? The man was very surprised that he had actually made it out of the forest alive, and the examiner approached him and inquired about his health. The professor pointed at him in shock, asking why he was even alive, causing the examiner to look at him in confusion, and MC asked with a smirk, shouldn't he have survived? The professor realized he had almost given himself away and awkwardly cleared his throat, saying he was surprised he had made it out of the forest alone. He replied that he wasn't actually alone. The boys followed him out of the forest, dragging a monster, and kept complaining that he wasn't helping them at all. This made the professor even more shocked, and he screamed, what the hell is that? The examiner examined the monster and asked if it could really be Cursed Fang. Falk told him that it had suddenly attacked them in the forest, and since it could have been targeting His Highness, they had brought its body as evidence. The examiner and the professor simultaneously exclaimed that this was impossible. One was shocked that the monster couldn't finish them off, and the other was perplexed as to where such a beast could have come from in the forest. Hearing the professor's exclamation, the examiner turned to him and asked what he had just said. Fortunately, he couldn't make out anything, and the professor nervously replied that he was simply impressed that they had defeated such a monster. Heinz emerged from the forest and joyfully spread his arms out to the side, saying, it was a truly magnificent battle. Seeing him, the professor was horrified, and the examiner approached the prince and asked if he had also fought the monster. Heinz replied that he had just happened to be nearby, and the professor realized that things were bad. He had set the monster on a member of the royal family. If this came to light, he would be finished. Noticing his expression, the prince asked if he was okay, and he nervously replied that it had been very dangerous, as expected of him. He had slain such a beast. Long live the kingdom. The boys glanced at him sideways, noticing that he was a bit nervous, and the prince repeated himself. He simply happened to be next to the monster, and the victory over it was entirely their doing. Van in particular, if not for him, everyone could have died. Everyone was very surprised. The Skalda saved His Highness? Ralph patted Van on the shoulder and delightedly told the others that this guy was something else. He was a Galda, but he also understood magic. Falk confirmed His Highness's words. They fought under Van's command. The professor was shocked. Why Galda? The prince said that it was nothing surprising. After all, he was under the patronage of House Steinertz. He turned to Van and asked, was he right? He had to confirm it, and he thought, in fact, Helena hadn't taught him anything, but now nothing could be done. The other students were very surprised. His Royal Highness spoke so highly of him, and he had a recommendation from the Ice Lady. Are there really capable people even among Galda? The examiner approached Van and bowed his head, sincerely thanking him for protecting His Highness as one of the kingdom's subjects. He replied that he wasn't protecting anyone. The monster had attacked and they simply counterattacked. In any case, they took out flowers. Each of them showed them a flower, meaning they had passed the exam, and the examiner looked at the professor, who cleared his throat. After that, he named each one. His Royal Highness Prince Heinz Feronia, Falk Waltrake, Ralph Eisenbach, and finally, Van Kolgar. He confirmed the successful passing of the exam by these four. The boys were very happy. They high-fived each other, and Falk, with a satisfied smile, said that it was obvious they could handle it. And that's how MC became a student at the academy. The prince turned to the examiner and asked, "What are they going to do with this beast?" He bowed and promised him to conduct a thorough investigation and report to the royal family. Soon, the entrance ceremony took place. Everyone gathered in the great hall, and the director began his speech. He was happy to welcome them all here with all his heart. Their academy demands more than just magical talent. Above all, they must become the swords and shields of the kingdom and demonstrate true nobility. Van smiled. In his past life, he could never have imagined standing among the aristocrats. This was only a small step, but the world had definitely begun to change. He would follow this path to the end until the day came when he could eradicate discrimination in Galda. Helena was also present at the ceremony, and she was very interested in Van. Afterwards, she went to the meeting. She opened the doors to the hall, where the coolest students were gathered at a round table. The Princess of 1,000 Bloody Blades, Karina Luthier, asked. She came last, yet she behaved so arrogantly. The Silver Valkyrie, Amelia Rodenwald, asked why they had gathered here today. And the Unbreakable Fist, Arnulf Clauvius, said, "If 5 outstanding people have gathered together, then there can only be one reason for discussion." The 8th Prince, the Lord of Thunder, Leonius Ferrania, agreed with him. They were probably here to decide what to do with the alien element. Helena asked, "So, an alien element?" Amelia said she heard something out of the ordinary had happened, and Arnulf told her. For the first time since its founding, the Academy had violated the ban and accepted Galda into its ranks. Karina said the Academy had completely lost its mind. Who will they accept next? Some monster? The prince agreed with her. A barbarian without a drop of magic is on par with them. It's outrageous. Moreover, the one who recommended this Galda, they say, is one of their renowned 5 outstanding people. He glanced at Helena and demanded an explanation. An academy where children of noble families, possessing immense magical power, gather. Their pride often sparks conflict, and petty squabbles often escalate into duels. To maintain order in such an academy, the students once created their own disciplinary committee. And it is these 5 students who stand at the top of the academy. The 5 outstanding, the 5 crowns. Leonius inquired why the Steinart's family had suddenly recommended some Galda, to which Helena calmly replied, "They simply acknowledged his power, and that's all." Karina laughed and asked if she was in her right mind. "These scum are cursed by the gods. They simply cannot have power." Amelia agreed with her. The academy is a place where swords and shields for the kingdom are forged. How can those without magic protect the people? Leonius added, "Those deprived of magic have no right to exist. Such is common sense in this country." Helena grinned and asked, "Common sense? A convenient word. An excuse for those who have stopped thinking and cling to bad habits." It was obvious how she had offended the prince with this, and Arnulf suggested they check whether this Van was worthy of studying at the academy. The prince agreed with him and mockingly asked Helena, she wouldn't mind, would she? If it turned out that he was weak, her insight would be questioned. She agreed without a problem and warned him. She doesn't know who he's going to set on him, but if he doesn't want to be disgraced, then he better not underestimate him. He grinned, and Karina rose from her seat, asking his permission to do this. He told her to have fun, and then she headed for the exit, and Helena asked if she was really interested in him. She told him she simply wanted to crush both his favorite and her ego. Time passed. MC was walking down the academy corridor, all the students around him chatting and thinking about their own things, just like him. A week had passed since he entered the academy, and he was leading a surprisingly calm life. Well, he had a couple of skirmishes, of course. During one of the lessons, the professor decided to mock him and asked if he could explain the theory of the 4 elements in magic. He remained silent, and his friends began whispering. They themselves didn't know what it was. It went beyond the elementary level. Without waiting for an answer, the professor waved his hand and said, "This question is probably too complicated for him. Lousy Galda can hardly even read." But Van knew everything. He stood up and answered him. The theory of the 4 elements is a theory that stabilizes the resonance of the 4 main factors, flow and density. This prevents stagnation and backflow of magic, which is why it forms the basis of modern magical formulas. The professor was shocked, but he smiled and asked if he needed more detailed explanations. The professor said that was enough, and from then on, there was no more open bullying. Ralph suddenly ran up to him and slapped him on the back, asking why he was so gloomy. Didn't he want to have lunch? He answered, "It's probably thanks to him and Falk, at least in part." The boy didn't understand what he was talking about, and MC explained to him. He says that he was a great help to him. Not wanting to talk about it anymore, he suggested that they go to the dining room, and Ralph ran up to him, asking with satisfaction what had suddenly come over him. A girl with a sword called out to them, Van turned to her, already sensing that something was going to happen, and she said that he had just passed her. They both apologized to her, but suddenly her blade ended up at Van's neck, which frightened Ralph and exclaimed, "What was she doing?" She said with a smirk, "When a commoner meets an aristocrat, he must kneel. Especially since he's Galda, wouldn't it be polite to press his forehead to the floor?" He told her there was no reason to demand such a thing. They were at the academy. All students were equal here. She called him a brat and asked if he even understood the situation. Her blade almost touched his skin. Ralph was very scared for his friend and exclaimed, even though she was a senior, this was too much. She promised him not to shed blood in vain, just let him not be stubborn and show obedience. Then, she would allow him to live a quiet student life. But MC was not going to bow down to her so easily and said, "It is possible to observe etiquette in front of seniors in principle, but when he is forced, he wants to resist." He grabbed the tip of her blade, she became wary and cursed, tugged the sword so that he would not take it away. However, he instead stepped towards her and pressed on the blade. Losing her balance, she reflexively gripped the hilt tighter, putting all her body weight on the thin blade. Then he slammed the edge of his palm into the blade, causing it to snap and fly off. It was a technique called blade breaking. Bending and twisting pushes the metal beyond its breaking point, causing instant structural failure. He asked if they had mixed brittle zinc into the steel. In any case, poking it with such iron, even without running magic through it, was like asking it to break. Swords with zinc admixture are cheaper than real ones and don't rust, so they are used for training, but their hardness and durability are low, making them unsuitable for real combat. She told him that real weapons were forbidden at the academy. After all, she wasn't one of the 5 crowns. He didn't understand who she was talking about, and she walked away, saying that she had fulfilled her duty. It turns out she did it on Karina's orders. She approached them with a smirk and said, "He does have fangs after all." A rebellious attitude towards upperclassmen and damage to personal property, like one of the crowns, she cannot turn a blind eye to this. She will have to punish him. Seeing her, MC was very surprised. He immediately recognized her. This is the Princess of 1,000 Bloody Blades, the one who took thousands of lives on the battlefield. But why is she here? In his first life, when he was an assassin, the kingdom was shaken by endless rebellions, and behind the scenes, everything was controlled by a fighting force of the remnants of the Purification faction, the Ring of White Destruction. Also, the most feared among them was the Bloody Blade Karina. She is a magical swordswoman who killed many heroes with her unrivaled skill. The kingdom destroyed the Ring of White Destruction at the cost of enormous sacrifices, but the chaos that arose at that time became the cause of the subsequent War of Succession. He saw her only once on the battlefield, but there was no mistaking her. Why is the kingdom's enemy in the academy? Karina suddenly said that she was bringing another accusation against him. He frowned, not understanding what he did this time, and she asked, staring at an upperclassman without saying a word, "Doesn't he think it's rude?" He smirked and bowed to her in apology. He just didn't notice that she was an upperclassman. She didn't like it, and his friend worriedly asked him to stop. In front of him was one of the 5 crowns. He didn't understand which 5 they were all talking about, and he exclaimed in surprise, "Doesn't he even know that? The 5 crowns are the 5 best students of the academy. Their strength and origin are on a completely different level. This Karina is a real genius, who entered the academy at 13. Now Van understood everything. The girl thanked him for introducing her. MC thought, so Bloody Blade was from the highest aristocracy? The fact that she was a noblewoman was probably hidden in the kingdom when she became a rebel. But who would have thought that they would meet at the academy? Maybe this was his chance? If he killed this woman now, he would destroy the seed of a future rebellion, and the war for the throne would never begin. And Heinz's chance to take the throne would also disappear. Karina accused him of another accusation. Thinking about extraneous things when she stood before him was the height of disrespect. She reached for her sword. Van clicked his tongue in displeasure, and she warned him that she had permission to carry a combat weapon. Seeing her fighting stance, he immediately realized that it was one of the Bloody Blade's signature moves, a strike with a blade snatch. They say that due to the incredible speed, the victim dies before even seeing the blade. Ralph became very worried and suggested that Van apologize to her, but he waved his hand and ordered him to step aside. He needed to check something. He decided to engage her in combat. She arrogantly called him a fool, then prepared herself. The upperclassmen glared at them with displeasure. Ralph swallowed nervously, and then Karina suddenly lunged forward. And MC didn't even have time to do anything, and she had already wounded him. Feeling the pain, he immediately fell to his knees, and his friend ran to him worriedly, and the girl looked thoughtfully at her sword. She decided to interrupt the punishment and continue another time and place. It would be a shame to deal with this guy in an instant. After that, she left with her subordinate, and they remained there. The upperclassman asked Karina why she let him go, and she, no longer able to stand on her feet, fell and answered her that she did not let him go. Her subordinate became very worried and helped her sit up, and she unbuttoned her shirt and, showing the mark of the blow, told her not to tell anyone about it. The girl was very surprised. It was the same move. She had seen it in old treatises. A blow to the solar plexus, the most vulnerable point. Karina said that she was in so much pain that she could barely move, and the girl asked, "So it was a draw?" Karina remained silent. That wasn't true at all. At that moment, she was aiming for his neck, and he, without hesitation, struck the vulnerable point. She tried to dodge. Because of this, the blade went crooked and missed its target, but his fist hit her solar plexus right on. That's an Ike move from fencing. How does he know that? The girl said that it was definitely not a draw. After all, only Lady Karina remained on her feet, so her victory was obvious. Karina agreed with her, but only verbally. The blow was strong, but not fatal. This guy managed to incapacitate her without even wounding her. If this had been a real fight, if he wanted to kill her, he would have succeeded. She stood up and said that, in any case, she had not underestimated him. Next time, she would prepare steel capable of breaking his fangs. Meanwhile, Ralph helped his friend to stand up and asked, what the hell was that? What did he want to make sure of? He told him to forget about it and asked him to explain everything properly. He was worried about him, and in the end, he was interested, he thought, choosing his words. Karina, although she threatened him, did not seriously hit him, and she did not use terrifying magic. She called it punishment, but she held back. So he told his friend that that girl, it turns out, was surprisingly kind, and he indignantly exclaimed, how is she kind? But it was true. The current Karina wasn't yet a bloody blade, which meant he could change her future without killing her. Ralph didn't question him further and took him to the infirmary, and the next day, Van returned to school. When he entered the classroom, the guys who had just been heatedly discussing something immediately fell silent and dispersed. He took his seat. The guys started whispering about yesterday's incident, and he, realizing what was going on, grinned. His friends came up to him and told him to ignore them. They were just weather vanes. Wherever the wind blows, there they go. MC said he didn't care, but they didn't hear him. And Ralph declared that he would go apologize to her with him, and Falk added, and he would ask his father to put in a good word with the Luthier family. Van smiled. They were very caring guys. He wouldn't have thought so the first time he met them. They turned away from him, embarrassed, asking him to stop, and he declared he appreciated their concern, but he would deal with Karina himself. His friends were still very worried, and he thought to prevent tragedy, he must face her right now. He asked, are the five just keeping order, right? There's no need to be so afraid of them? His friends asked if he even understood the situation he was in. Their conversation was interrupted by Helena entering the classroom. She called Van over for a talk. Seeing her, everyone was very surprised, and MC asked what was going on. The lesson would start soon. Helena told him she needed to talk to him, but it wouldn't be long. He didn't refuse and followed her, shocking the other students and confirming that he really did know her and that he was talking to her so frivolously. Who was he anyway? They went into the garden to talk and settled in the gazebo. Helena told him about the 5 crowns, deciding to test his strength, and he noted that such things should be warned up front. She apologized to him. She hadn't thought Karina would act so quickly. She is the heiress of the Luthier family, which stands at the pinnacle of swordsmanship. Van touched his chin in confusion and remarked that having such skill at her age was quite impressive. But she was more than just a genius. Helena asked him why he thought that, and he said it felt like she had given up everything but the sword. Helena said he was right. She wasn't just a gifted genius. In fact, she was the daughter of a branch family, not even really a noblewoman. But when she was 10 years old, in a training match that was practically a game, she crushed her 18-year-old brother, who was considered the heir. Thanks to her talent as a swordsman, she was recognized as the heir, but her family didn't love her. She grew up surrounded by envy and hatred. MC asked how she knew all this so well, and she answered with a smile that she heard the rumors on her own. Nobles love to gossip. Besides, she saw her once at a social event before entering the academy. She stood apart from everyone and only looked at her father's back, her gaze very sad. He asked if she had approached her. Helena told him that she couldn't have done so then. They were both from noble families. If she had shown sympathy towards her, everyone would have thought she was meddling in something that was none of her business. Van leaned back in his chair, noting that nobles were such bores, and she agreed with him. It had bothered her back then, although she didn't think Karina even remembered it. If this continued, she would lose her way one day. MC thought for a moment, and then, with a grim expression, asked what she would do if that happened. She confidently answered him that she would want to stop her. The fact that she had looked away back then still haunted her. Now Van understood everything. As a mage, Helena was no inferior to the heroes from his past life, but he didn't know her name. It all seemed strange to him. Most likely she had tried to stop Karina at the cost of her own life and ended up dying. She had no chance to become famous. Helena said that even though she had told him all this, he shouldn't expect pity. Her talent for fencing is real. If he makes a mistake, she really can kill him. He smirked and told her that he understands everything. After this conversation, he is even more motivated. He will end her regrets. In a past life, no one could stop Karina, but now everything is different. He will break her distorted beliefs and stop her. Helena was surprised by his confident statement and said, "It is nice to hear such words." Maybe she even expected him to say it. But does he have a plan against her fencing? It is too late to ask, but still, he answered her. Of course he has a plan, so he wants her to practice with him after class. In the evening, after class, the boys went into the forest following their friend's tracks. Ralph constantly looked around, and his friend noticed that this was already some kind of frightening surveillance. He turned to him and said, he is interested in what they are doing. Immediately after the lesson, he disappeared along with Lady Helena. Falk was also curious, and they finally saw Van's back. Ralph was very happy that they had found them, but they arrived at the wrong time, right in the middle of the fight. Helena released the ice. Ralph fell in fear and exclaimed, "What is she doing?" MC was distracted by them, which Helena decided to take advantage of, and exclaimed, "Where is he looking in the middle of the fight?" She used the spell Thousand Thorns of the Ice Garden, and huge chunks of ice headed straight for the boys, and then Van stood in front of them and hit them with his palm, splitting them into pieces. After that, he turned to them and said with a smile that they had arrived at the right time. Do they want to join him in the next attack? Time passed. Karina was walking down the corridor, and on the way she met the prince. She raised her eyebrows in displeasure, inquiring what he wanted from her, and he asked, he doesn't want to rush her, but when will she finally get around to that Galda? She curtsied, telling him she could do it right away. What she had requested from the estate had finally arrived. Her subordinate followed her down the corridor, dragging a huge, heavy chest. She asked Lady Karina where she should take it, and she ordered her to take it to her room, but to be careful. The prince was surprised. He had heard of such things, but he had never seen them before. She asked him if this wasn't too much for Gald alone, to which he replied, she, who lived for the blade, couldn't come up with a better scenario. Soon, a notice was posted for everyone to see. One of the five, Karina Luthier, was challenging first-year Van Kolde to a duel as punishment for a breach of discipline. And very soon, everyone had gathered on the large training ground of the Royal Academy, known as the White Ring. This is the place for formal duels between students and special trials, a sacred arena. Standing below, MC was warming up, and the Five Crowns and his friends, along with Helena, were in the spectator seats. Ralph looked around and noticed that there were a lot of people here, but the atmosphere was somehow oppressive. Falk remarked, no one expects this to be a fair duel. His friend didn't understand what he meant, and Helena said that it wouldn't be a duel, but an execution. A fight between one of the five and Galda would end in a one-sided beating. That's what everyone thought. Ralph folded his arms and thoughtfully noted, from a common-sense perspective, it's possible, but they know the truth. Falk smirked and said, Van isn't someone to whom normal standards apply. Helena glanced at the prince, standing on the very top floor, and said, looks like that guy over there thinks the same. Heinz waited for the fight to begin. His brother noticed him, and wondered why he even came to watch this. Noticing his gaze, Heinz smiled sweetly, and he immediately looked away with irritation. And finally, it was time for the duel. The gates swung open, and everyone began to wait for Karina. Dragging a huge chest behind her, she entered the arena, and Helena exclaimed in surprise, did she seriously bring this thing? Karina stopped. Judging by Van's look, he was also very surprised. After that, the girl sharply waved her hand, lifting the chest and pulling the chains off it. MC, although nervous, held himself confidently and asked, is this for him instead of a shield? Is she that caring? She ordered him to stop clowning around. This shield of blades is too good for someone like him. The chest swung open, and several dozen swords flew out, which made Van even more uneasy. Meanwhile, Helena told his friends that this was a shield of blades, a mobile arsenal, an heirloom of the Luthier family. Falk exclaimed indignantly, what's going on in the head of this 5 crowns? At this point, Karina drew her sword and pointed it at Van, saying, she'll make him regret ever setting foot in this academy. He smirked and told her not to cry later. He'd smash her precious toy to pieces. She didn't attack first, and he asked, why is she standing? She was waiting for the go-ahead. Having told him that it had already begun, she rushed to attack, and he met her halfway. He ducked, accelerated sharply, and was next to her in an instant, then punched her, but she managed to block it, just barely. The impact made a loud sound, and the students were surprised how this guy got next to her so quickly. And Falk frowned, noting, no matter how much he looked at it, it was downright magic. Helena said it was a ghostly tread, that's what they call it. Usually, before a dash, a person pushes off the ground, which gives away their intentions, but Van doesn't push off. He shifts his center of gravity, rotates his pelvis, and slides his entire body forward. That's the essence of his technique. Ralph, puzzled, said that even with the explanation, he didn't understand anything, but his friend decided to simply simplify everything. In short, from the outside, it's pure magic. Helena agreed, and Karina, standing right in front of him, seemed to see him teleport. She thought so too when she first saw it in the forest. MC struck again, and Falk noted with a smile that the range was excellent. In close combat, he clearly had the advantage. Ralph was also in high spirits. After all, you can't swing a long sword that close to an opponent. But Karina decided to act differently, sharply turning her sword and striking with the hilt. Everyone onlookers held their breath. Fortunately, Van was able to block the blow, but he offered his hand to do so. After that, she started to press him, swinging her sword several times. He continued to defend himself, and cuts appeared on his arms, forcing him to retreat to the edge of the arena. Karina asked, did he really think she couldn't do anything up close? MC grinned. It was a half-sword technique. Ralph was surprised by this and said, long swords have an unsharpened area called the choil. What is half-sword technique? It's a close-range fighting technique where one hand is placed on the choil. He'd heard it was useful in war, but noble ladies didn't learn it. Falk noted that the rumors about her being the next holy sword weren't entirely false. However, Helena wasn't the one who thought it was a bad idea against Van. He immediately approached her, struck her with a blow, which she blocked with her blade, and then followed with many more blows. She missed one of them and clicked her tongue in annoyance, and then he enthusiastically pounced on her, exclaiming, He's only just begun. Now he was attacking, and she was defending herself. Leonius asked what she was doing. She was just taking hits. Karina's friend explained to him that it is extremely difficult for them, magical swordsmen, to evade this without magic. That's why Van's blows, which don't contain the slightest bit of magic, are invisible to them. But Karina didn't care, because a simple physical blow couldn't penetrate her defense. Or so she thought until one moment. Her magical defense suddenly dropped, and she nervously grabbed her head and asked, "What did he do?" He smirked and asked in response, "Who knows? Maybe her magic control is poor." She glared at him, but it was actually Kudo, an empty hull. Using wind pressure from a palm strike could damage the immersion channels inside the ear. Karina was in no hurry to attack. The students were surprised that some Galda was pressing her, and the prince called out to her and indignantly asked, "What is she doing? Is she a noblewoman or what?" Heinz watched the fight with a calm expression. He saw that Karina was stunned, and the MC decided to end the fight, and her subordinate called out to her worriedly. As soon as he took off, Karina smirked. It was her trap. Immediately after that, a magic circle appeared in the sky. Lightning struck the arena, and her sword shattered, and at the point of impact, the entire floor around her crumbled. All the students were shocked, as was Van. She simply lowered the sword, infusing it with magic, and that's all. The blow didn't even hit him, but sent shivers down his spine. Karina threw the broken sword aside and said, "This is why holy swords have needed special hilts since time immemorial." She took out a new sword and said, "This is a Himmelsturz, the blade of heavenly fall. As he can see, there's one drawback. A normal sword can't withstand it." The prince grinned, realizing that she had just been toying with him until now, and the girl said, if he had missed such a blow, he would have been collected all over the arena. MC advised his opponent to be more careful with a weapon, and she said with a smirk that she would take this into account. The next blow would decide everything. She imbued the sword with magic, causing several circles to appear, and one of the students asked worriedly, was she seriously planning to kill him? His friend chuckled and told him that he had gone against the nobility, so it was only natural. But Ralph was very worried about his friend, because if he was hit, he would really die. Falk was also nervous, but told him not to worry. The main thing was to not get hit, which was possible with his ghostly step. Helena was doubtful. His attacks were effective, it was true, but they weren't enough to knock Karina down with one blow. Meanwhile, her heavenly blade could destroy it with one blow. In other words, Karina could intentionally take his blows just to use her Himmelsturz blade at point-blank range. And even if he dodged at that distance, he would be covered by the shockwave. Falk asked, without magical protection, it was certain death, right? Ralph was even more frightened. He was deeply worried about his friend and wondered what he would do. Meanwhile, Karina warned her rival one last time. Let him acknowledge his place in society, and then she would spare his life. He noticed that she was overly fixated on this place in society, and she answered that it was a given. Magical power is determined by the frequency of the blood. All order in their country is based on this. He grinned and remarked, a typical answer of an aristocrat. She thinks that if she acts like a noblewoman, she will truly become one of them? She frowned, paused, and asked what he just said. He mockingly answered her that he knew everything. She was half commoner after all. Was she going out of her way, pretending to be an aristocrat, just so that Daddy would notice her? All these memories played in her head. She stared at him in shock. And then in rage, she spilled all her magic out. Even the audience felt it. Falk wondered what they were talking about if she was reacting like that, and Helena answered him. It seemed like he was provoking her, wanting her to hit him with all her strength, without any games. Ralph worriedly asked why he was doing this, and his friend had an idea and asked if he was really going to pull that very thing. Karina always felt like an outsider infiltrating aristocratic society. Therefore, even though he was Galda, she sympathized with him, so she volunteered to be his examiner. She was going to settle everything without killing him. And he, unaware of her feelings, decided to humiliate her. She clenched her teeth in rage and raised another sword, telling him to come to her. She would kill him as he wished. They walked towards each other. She swung her sword, but something unexpected happened for her. He simply stopped it with his bare hands. All the spectators were shocked. This was just sheer nonsense. Such a move is impossible in a real fight. In reality, you can't stop a falling blade with your palm. But what Van did was synchronize his hand speed with the blade's speed as closely as possible, and then began to dampen its momentum from the moment of contact. In that brief instant, while the sword was still descending, he dissipated and absorbed the entire force of the blow. This technique is called zero grip. The fact that he was able to deflect all of Helena's ice spears is also a result of this technique. He smirked and noted that the heavenly blade was a monstrous attack, but even its power was completely suppressed. Karina was indignant. She simply couldn't believe it, and MC took advantage of her confusion to deal her a devastating blow. She was thrown several meters away, hit her back against the armory, and fell, blood spurting from her mouth. The students were surprised. They had just seen the Princess of 1,000 Blades fall to her knees before their eyes. Could this really be the true power of that Galda? The prince gritted his teeth in frustration, and the girl was very worried about her lady. Meanwhile, Van's friends were very happy and told him not to relax and finish her off. He looked at the girl sullenly, and she asked why he didn't deliver the finishing blow. Did he really decide to show her mercy? He answered that it wasn't so. no, he just wasn't going to beat up an ordinary noble lady. She hadn't given it her all yet, so let her begin. Let her show him the real Karina. She wiped the blood from her lips and furiously told him not to speak as if he knew everything about her. She reached into the arsenal and pulled out of the magic circle the very sword that everyone had heard about but had never seen before. Ralph asked, "Are you serious?" His friend, although not a swordsman, even he had heard of this legendary sword. Helena said it was one of the most famous blades in their country, the symbol of the holy swordsman, the dancing blade, the star ring. It is a flexible spring sword, forged from an incredibly thin golden alloy. In MC's past life, it was called the Sword of Carnage, the Blood Chain. Karina pointed the weapon at him and said, if so, she will show him why she bears the title of the Knight of Order and what she sacrificed to get here. MC's face turned serious. He understood how powerful she was with this sword and said that he would be happy to see it. She swung the sword and exclaimed, "Here it is, her true power. Let him try to reflect it if he can." Her strike raised a hurricane, destroying the entire arena. Falk and Ralph were surprised. "Is this fencing?" Helena told them it is unique magic, a dance of blades. It was a secret technique that even her family didn't know about. She enhanced the blade's flexibility with magic and expanded its attack range to its limit. Van stood still, unhurried, and his opponent said, "The blade dance spares no one who enters its circle. It shreds everything indiscriminately, the wind, even sound." This death zone instantly covered the entire arena. He could admit defeat and flee. She didn't mind. But if he stayed, there wouldn't be a single scrap of him left. He said that she shouldn't have stretched the kill zone so much. He would approach it himself. He took a few confident steps forward. The tornado was still far away, but he only had to concentrate a little, and he could see it. Tachypsychia is a phenomenon of the brain overclocking in a critical situation. It is a defense mechanism that allows one to find a way to escape in the chaos of battle. Normal people experience it only accidentally, but MC has learned to induce this state at will. He found his way and confidently stepped into the tornado, spreading his arms wide, parrying the swift blows. The princess wondered if he'd managed to parry that. He struck precisely at the blade's tip. Van knew that a flexible sword's center of gravity was always at the tip. He couldn't be distracted by chaotic movements. He just needed to knock down the points. He waved his arms, parrying every blow, and she exclaimed, "So he turns out he was a monster too?" He told her that he simply trained more than the others, just like her. She didn't understand what he meant, and he explained, "A flexible sword chooses its owner. In unskilled hands, the blade will only wound the owner. Talent alone cannot achieve such mastery." So he wonders how much time she spent practicing one blow. She was surprised that he understood everything. It happened when she was still very young. Only once did her father show her how to hold a sword. Maybe it was just a momentary whim, but in that moment she felt a real connection with him. But that was where it all ended. Busy with state affairs, her father did not have time to care for an illegitimate daughter like her, so she decided to perfect her swordsmanship. She thought that if she became stronger than everyone else, then her father would finally acknowledge her. She trained until she sweated blood and became too strong. When she defeated her 17-year-old brother, the disdain in the eyes of those around her finally disappeared, and fear and awe appeared in their place. And even her father no longer looked at her with that warmth. He saw her as a threat. This was only the beginning. For the sake of the family's peace, to accept a legitimate heir and raise a worthy vessel, rejecting her was the right decision. And then she understood everything. She needed nothing more. She would silence everyone. She would prove her worth with absolute power. This was the only way for her to be accepted in this family. Now she screamed in rage. What could he even know about her? She pointed her sword at him. The wind blades inflicted several wounds on him, but he still dodged the main blow, which greatly surprised everyone else. How did he manage to act so quickly in the midst of such a storm? Karina exclaimed, "What the hell is going on? Her blade cuts even the wind. How does he manage to dodge? There's not a drop of magic in him." He continued to stubbornly move forward, parrying every blow, and she screamed, "Why is he trying so hard?" Her sword was crushing everyone, and here he is, without magic. MC just wanted to prevent the uprising, but that's not all. He knows what it's like when you train so desperately to become stronger, and then your power is taken away by villains. He knows this suffering like no one else. Gritting his teeth, he continued walking towards her and said that he hears someone crying. "How can he leave this poor thing?" She exclaimed indignantly that she is not crying, and he said, "He sees everything. Her sword is shedding tears instead of her. Isn't that enough? Why don't you acknowledge me?" That's what her sword and she are screaming. Surprise reflected on her face for a moment, and then it was replaced by rage, and she screamed. What does he even know about her? This is all she has. She needs to become stronger than everyone else to make everyone bow their heads. She unleashed a few more blows on him. He blocked most of them, but his body was covered in new cuts. He said she was right. He knew nothing, but let her listen to him. She determines her own worth. Her pain, hidden in the night, the power of every swing of the sword with which she carves her soul, that cannot be taken away. Even if no one admits it, she is a better magic swordsman, at least for him. His words made her remember the only lesson with her father. Even if her sword is aimed at the enemy, she should never wield it out of anger or hatred. She must be pure, keep her honor within herself even on the battlefield. This is the sword of the House of Luthier. The hurricane dispersed, and Van finally reached his target and took the girl's hand. A tear rolled down her cheek, and she thought, that's what her father once told her. Honor. All this is not for someone else's approval, but for remaining yourself. That's how she completely forgot what he taught her. She dropped the sword, headed to the armory, and thanked Van for these words. He helped her remember how she dreamed of mastering the sword. She took the new weapon, turned to him and said, "This time she will give everything for this technique. Will he endure it?" He smirked and said that he was only too glad. Everyone held their breath. Then Karina lunged forward. A simple strike from above, and yet it was filigree. This was the only technique her father taught her. MC smiled, glad that he finally learned what she really was, and then struck back. A second and Karina fell, and her sword finished the blow and left a deep crack in the wall. It was a complete defeat, but she was not upset. She turned to him with a smile, thanking him for this fight, and he extended his hand to her, saying that he was grateful too. It was simply incredible. The arena remained silent. Everyone was shocked by her defeat. A first year had defeated the 5th crown, and Galda to boot. The silence was broken by the first round of applause from the prince, and everyone followed him. To loud, triumphant applause, Karina accepted Van's help and stood up. The next day, everyone went to class as usual, and Falk asked Van if his wounds had healed yet. He smiled and told him that the healer had patched him up pretty well, and Ralph exclaimed that it was simply amazing. He couldn't believe he had defeated her. Falk was very proud of his friend. This battle would go down in Academy history, and MC asked them to stop. It was just a simple duel. Falk immediately grabbed his shoulder and exclaimed, "You call this a simple fight?" A first year had defeated the 5th crown. Suddenly, Ralph noticed something and pointed to a tree, telling them to look there. The Princess of 1,000 Blades was there. She stood by the tree, looking at them, and Van was surprised that she was also healthy after yesterday. With a heavy sigh, she approached them, and the boys immediately became wary. Ralph even thought that she came for revenge, and Falk told him to calm down. Yesterday's duel was official. She can't just attack him. MC smiled and waved his hand at the upperclassman, greeting her, and she advised him to work on his manners. He apologized and jokingly asked if he was in for punishment. She answered him that she hadn't come for that, after which she sheepishly pointed her finger at him and ordered him to become her squire. All three were shocked by this proposal. A squire is a young man who serves as a knight in order to master the code of honor. In the Royal Academy, this is the name of the system when the upperclassmen help the younger ones who have caught their interest. Karina declared, "From now on, in the name of the 5 crowns, she will personally provide him with assistance and correct his behavior." Van was very upset. This meant that she would now be watching him. Meanwhile, Falk whispered to Ralph that this was even good. Now no one would disturb Van while she was watching him. Hearing their whispers, MC understood her intentions. He certainly appreciated it all, but Karina proudly raised her head and said that it was an honor for him. She personally took him under her wing, and now let him kneel and swear an oath of allegiance to her. The boys froze in anticipation. Van sighed heavily and bowed to the girl, saying that he was very grateful to her, but he refused. Immediately after these words, he broke into a run and exclaimed, "He hates being watched." Karina clearly did not expect this. She rushed after him and exclaimed indignantly, "Does not he need her help?" The boys' voices remained where they were, and Ralph was very puzzled by the behavior of the Princess of 1,000 Swords, and he hinted at his friend, "Could she be? This is definitely not it, right?" Meanwhile, 3 of the 5 crowns gathered in the hall to discuss everything. The prince slammed his fist on the armrest in anger and said that it was a disgrace. One of the 5 crowns lost to a simple Galda. Arnulf just looked out the window and thought, and Amelia sipped tea. Leonius said that at first he thought it was Helena. After all, she exerted influence, trying to push Galda here. But he defeated Karina. Everything changed. He is not from the royal family, and he is not a mage. They understand what this means, right? The hierarchy is built on magic depending on the skill with which the nobility helps people. And the royal family rules the country. That woman is trying to destroy everything. This is an attack on the kingdom. He glanced at the other members of the 5. Arnulf stared out the window and wondered how Van even knew these techniques. Taking a sip of tea, Amelia calmly told the prince that there was no reason for that. Van's techniques are no obstacle to them. These are one-on-one duels, and they need a force that will protect the people, and a hammer that will destroy the enemy. What will he do against a horde of monsters? And without magic too, he can only become a mercenary. That's all. He can't replace the nobility. After all, the whole country rests on them. The prince calmed down because she was right, and he asked if she can inform all the students about this. She answered him that an excellent opportunity for this would soon arise, and he clarified she meant Legion training. Legion training is one of the disciplines at the academy. Students form a group, regardless of age, and fight magical monsters. Amelia said that the upperclassmen would handle the organization, so she would take him under her wing and find his weak points. The prince was very pleased with this plan, and at that moment Heinz entered the hall, saying, "This all sounds fun." Leonius was surprised by his presence here, and Amelia calmly greeted him and said, with all due respect, that this hall is only for the 5 crowns. Not even members of the royal family are allowed here. He bowed, apologizing to her, but he needed to tell her something about the Legion. Could he and his friends come with them too? Amelia was surprised that His Highness wanted to join her group, and he said, after hearing her words, he firmly decided to fight her. She bowed to him, saying that it was an honor for her. Of course she agreed. Then she will train Van. She will show him that magic is an absolute power capable of protecting the country. Heinz only smirked contentedly in response. Meanwhile, Karina finally caught up and grabbed Van. Soon, Helena told Van and his friends about the upcoming event during tea. MC had no idea what it was, and Ralph gave him a brief rundown. They assemble units and carry out missions together. Falk added enthusiastically. Besides this, each student actually gives orders to the royal soldiers. He thoughtfully remarked that this was just training for experience as a commander, and Helena said it was a real battle. This time, they would be in the magical wasteland of the Weeping Marshes. Lands saturated with magical power are called magical wastelands. The shady forest where the academy entrance exam is held is just a patch. They actually talked about this in class, but these wastelands are teeming with magical creatures. When there are too many of them, they move to new territory, scattering in all directions. Because of this, civilians suffer, so they sometimes exterminate these beasts to prevent a stampede. This is one of the most important tasks of the elite. Van paused, and Helena asked if something was wrong. He told her everything was fine, and she continued. During training, they assemble units with academy students, and the royal soldiers form a single legion. First years become squad leaders, and they, the upperclassmen, organize them into companies. Ralph asked if they prove themselves during training, they will be recognized, right? She confirmed this. The 5 crowns achieved major victories right during Legion training. Falk noted that since the operation is conducted at the company level, the commander is very important, and Helena agreed. Those nominated by the upperclassmen are appointed to the squads. MC was sure that under such a system, he would end up with nothing, but contrary to his expectations, Helena said with a smile that there were actually a couple of seniors who wanted to choose him. He looked at her in bewilderment, and she said that it was good for him. Many upperclassmen respected him. His friends were very proud of him, which is not surprising, since he defeated the Princess of Blades herself. He also defeated Cursed Fang in the entrance exams. Everyone is very curious about his techniques, immense strength, and no magic. Van was very surprised. They respect him? A native of Galda? In his past life, he could not even dream of this. Apparently, the world is beginning to change step by step, although not everyone likes it. He looked up at the academy. Leonius was watching him from the window. He was very surprised when they met eyes. He wondered if he really noticed his gaze, but how is that possible? Without magic, it is impossible to sense someone else's presence at such a distance. He walked away from the window, arrogantly telling them all to play at being friends while they can. Meanwhile, Helena said, one way or another, they will not hurt him, but given the authority of the 5 crown, she wants to take him with her, as well as his friends. The boys were very happy, but suddenly Karina's voice was heard, ordering them not to rush. They didn't even notice her approach. MC winced, knowing she'd start it all again. Karina pointed her finger at him and exclaimed that she was responsible for her squire. She would be the one giving him orders. He jumped up from the table and exclaimed that he'd turned her down, and Helena laughed, noting that it was all so interesting, she didn't mind. Van indignantly asked her not to decide for him, and a couple of days later they went to the notice board, where the lists had already been posted. A crowd had gathered, and making his way through the crowd, Falk told Van that if the cool seniors chose him, it would be a great honor. Well, it doesn't concern them. Everyone here is so serious. MC said he wasn't there. His friends turned to him in bewilderment, asking what was wrong, and he confusedly told them that he wasn't on Helena's team. Ralph began searching for his name on the Thousand Blades Princess's company roster, but Van had already found himself in the 5th company with Amelia Rosenwald. Ralph was greatly surprised, and Falk noticed another familiar name on the list, Heinz Ferrania. MC was a little taken aback by this development, but suddenly someone touched his back, and he immediately turned to see Heinz waving at him, along with Amelia. The prince extended his hand, saying they hadn't seen each other in a while, and invited him to work hard as a team. Van looked down, still remembering how he had acted in his past life, and ignored the gesture. The prince withdrew his hand with an awkward smile, and Amelia asked, so he was Van Colgar? She introduced herself, saying she was one of the 5 crowns and his commander, and he bowed to her, apologizing for the late greeting. She told him it was fine. She didn't like all this formality. However, she would immediately tell him to know his place as Galda and follow her instructions. Her chilling tone made him uneasy, and Helena immediately called out to her, asking if she thought that was a bit rude. She replied that it was still kind. If weaklings come forward, they will put themselves and the entire team at risk. On the battlefield, everyone must know their tasks and fulfill them, and Galda's role without magic is scout and sentry. MC was stunned. He didn't hear any contempt or malice in her words. She simply sincerely believed in what she was saying. People like that are nothing but trouble. He told her that she was right when she said that one must fulfill one's role. That's why he entered the academy. Helena told him that casting spells isn't the only principle of magic. If he can suppress a mage without spells, he will definitely deserve to become a knight. Recalling these words, he told Amelia that he had come to show Galda what he could do without magic. She would see for herself whether he was a burden or not. She looked him up and down, paused, and turned away, saying goodbye. She, at the very least, acknowledged his strength of spirit. Heinz also decided to leave and, as a parting word, told Van not to worry. He was sure he would be able to demonstrate his abilities. He followed Amelia, and Karina asked if the prince had orchestrated this. Helena confidently said that they had used connections to influence the distribution of teams. She hadn't thought things would go this far. MC was nervous. Things were only getting more complicated, and this mission was already dangerous. He had already heard about magical monsters in the Weeping Marshes. One day, the royal army encountered a new kind of magical creature. and almost all the soldiers died. The monster caused a stampede and nearly destroyed everything around it. Many became heroes in that battle, and in the end the monster was stopped. But the royal lands were reduced to ashes, and then a civil war began. His friends approached him, worriedly asking if he was okay, and he told them everything was fine, he was just thinking. The boys started discussing it, and he thought, if a new kind of monster appears again this time, they will definitely suffer, and that can't be allowed. He wanted to go with Helena or Karina, but now things were even more complicated. He glanced at them. Karina noticed it, and with a satisfied smirk, told Helena that he had just looked at her. He clearly wanted to be with her. She only smiled awkwardly in response, and he thought, perhaps she had decided to make him look like a nobody on the battlefield, but the real danger was different. This operation clearly would not end quietly. Soon, it was time to set off, and all the squads, their captains, and Commander Amelia herself gathered together. Before setting off, she told them they would be ahead of everyone else and would be heading to the Weeping Marsh. She wanted each of them to show their pride as members of the elite and their determination as soldiers. They unanimously confirmed that the task was clear to them and prepared themselves. The soldiers in Heinz's squad were excited. After all, they were commanded by His Highness himself. If they succeeded, they would bring glory to their homeland. Van glanced at them and thought that the royal soldiers were already energized, but not all of them. The soldiers in his team were very unhappy with the current situation. One of them whispered to his comrade, "Why their leader Galda? He doesn't even have a weapon or magic. Are they cannon fodder?" Irritation immediately flared inside MC. After all, they weren't shy about saying all this out loud. He decided to remind them of their position, took a deep breath, and turned to them, saying that he was their leader and would be giving them orders. They probably had something to say, but they would do without talking. Now, let them think only about the mission. They remained silent, measuring him with mocking glances, and he mentally called them rude. Amelia noticed the mood in their squad. Things were going badly, but that was natural. Among the senior ranks, the soldiers themselves choose their leader. The team determines their fate. Who would want to entrust their life to some Galda without magic? Ultimately, ambitious, experienced soldiers compete under the command of the honorable elite. Only career soldiers with no future serve under him. The quality of the troops speaks to the professionalism of the commander. That's all Van Kolgar can do. And so it was time to set out. Amelia announced the start of the Legion's training, and all the soldiers responded enthusiastically. Only Van's squad remained silent. Time passed, they covered some distance, and Amelia decided to stop for a rest. Heinz told his squad to be sure to drink, always be alert and observe. The other commanders prioritized checking their equipment and the soldiers' well-being. Van's squad, however, was less than enthusiastic. Exhausted from the long journey, they sat down on the ground, and one of them warily lowered his head, saying that they had driven them to death. And the second spat irritably to the side and said, "It's easy for the captain to ride a horse." MC frowned at them, and the man defiantly asked if he had anything to say. He answered that he didn't. Apparently, they wanted to speak out. They were stopping for a rest stop, so he would listen to them. The man became very angry. He jumped up and exclaimed, "What kind of a squad are they? Their equipment was old, and the captain was completely defenseless, Galda, and they were going to go into the Weeping Marshes like this? Were they really just a shield for the elite?" Van said that he understood them. They were soldiers after all, and service was a matter of life and death for them. But let them look at it differently. He dismounted and flexed his fists. He wouldn't convince them with words, so he'd better show them everything. The man was slightly taken aback, and he said, "If they want to complain to him, then let them go ahead. They can all attack him. He can handle it." They thought about it. The man became very angry and attacked him with a sword. But MC quickly reacted and stopped the blade with his bare hand, surprising him, and then simply took it from him, causing him to fall and hit his head. Everyone else was surprised that he was able to disarm him so easily, and he quickly checked the blade and glanced at them, asking, "Are they not going to attack him?" They remained silent. No one dared attack him, and then with a heavy sigh he asked, "Did they say the equipment was bad?" He turned sharply and swung his sword, demonstrating the opposite. The blade easily cut down the tree, and it fell with a crash. His soldiers were surprised, and the rest noticed the noise. After that, Van handed the sword to the man and said with a grin, "True, the equipment is not new, but still worthy. He knows how to use weapons. He studied all the types before choosing a fighting style. He will learn how to work with them. They will not die in vain. And if they don't like something, they can arrange a wonderful dinner for the monster." These words made them nervous. He decided to leave it at that for now, and Amelia, who had been watching him all this time, frowned. She didn't think that he would argue with his men. It was stupid. You need to command with your heart. Soldiers motivated by fear alone may obey, but as soon as they reach the edge, control will be lost. His own soldiers will rebel against him. It's all over for him. Soon night fell. Having advanced even further, they set up camp in the forest in front of the Weeping Swamps. Everyone was busy with their own affairs. Amelia was strategizing. Heinz was just reading books, and MC was missing somewhere. His squad was sitting by the fire and scraping together a few scraps of bread. One of them wondered where he had disappeared to, and the guys answered, "Who knows? He's not in the tent. Maybe he abandoned them? They're not worthy after all." He sighed heavily to the men and said that he wouldn't be surprised. They were just expendable. They weren't fit for the royal army, that they were losers, that the captain was from Galda. At that moment, Van approached them and asked who the loser was. He sat down next to them and opened the huge sack he had brought, Inside were aromatic herbs, mushrooms, and hairs. The soldiers looked at his loot in surprise, after which MC chopped everything into soup and fried the meat. Finally, everything was ready. They watched in surprise as he poured soup into bowls. He then handed one to the man and told them all to eat. Rations would be scarce. They needed strength for tomorrow's battle. He also handed him some grass and told him to crush it and rub the insoles of his shoes with it to help with blisters. The man, confused, pulled away from him and exclaimed, "Why was he suddenly being so polite? He wanted to bribe them with food." Van thought for a second, then looked down and answered that he had been in their place too. He too had rubbed his feet until they bled, and he too had eaten tough bread. Sometimes, this bread would make his stomach churn so much that he could barely stand, let alone fight. The men looked at him thoughtfully. They had experienced all this. They had one piece of bread, which they divided among 5. It was not enough for them, and only whetted their appetites. The guy asked if he'd ever fought anyone at that age. His comrade reminded him that he was Galda, so it wasn't surprising. The man looked at the captain suspiciously and asked if he felt sorry for them. He told him it wasn't pity, it was an investment. He would use them to achieve his goal and receive a reward. But he promised them he would never use them as expendable material. He would bring each of them home. So if they wanted to survive, let them work for his goal. They wouldn't regret it. He handed the man the soup again, and he stared at him in surprise, just like everyone else. After that, he grinned and asked, "So that's how it is?" MC asked what was so funny about what he said, and he, taking the bowl of soup, answered with a smile. It was the first time he'd seen Galda come up with such a speech. His comrade asked in confusion, "Does he believe the captain?" He told him that they had no choice, then took a sip of soup and added, "Besides, he is strong and cooks deliciously. Maybe he is worth trusting, unlike the elite." Van smiled. He learned this lesson in his past life. Ordinary soldiers are different from the elite. In the name of the country or in the name of the people, they do not care about all this. They will not risk their lives for the sake of the king's ideas. Most of all, they want to return alive to their families. So he did not tell them about ideals. What will bring them incredible strength and a real advantage is survival. This is the only way to gain trust. Finally, everyone began to eat without a doubt, and he began to watch them with a smile. At dawn, they broke camp. Amelia ordered the soldiers to wait for her signal when they were finished, and turned her gaze to Van. They finished folding the tent and were now ready to set off, and MC told them with a smile to wait for orders, and that they should not forget to monitor their surroundings. They stood at attention, unanimously answering him that they understood everything, and Amelia was simply shocked to see this. He turned these outcasts into normal fighters in just one night. Heinz approached her and remarked, "It seems that he also has something of a general's nature. Maybe it's because he is Galda? That's why he leads the army differently." Amelia was still skeptical and told the prince that they would still test his abilities. After that, she ordered all the squad captains to come to her. She would give orders. They gathered around a large table. She pointed to the map and said, "Behind this forest is their goal, the Weeping Marshes. Most of the swamp is covered with tall grass. There are some copses here and there. Overall, the view is good, but all territories are under the control of monsters. They must keep in mind that they can lie in wait even in a tiny bush." Now she will explain the plan of operation to them. As the vanguard of the Legion, their job is to detect enemy presence in the swamps. To do this, their unit will form a wedge and charge through the swamp. The captains were surprised. That would mean they would charge straight at the enemy. And Heinz pointed out, "This is reconnaissance in force." She confirmed this. Reconnaissance in force is a deliberate invasion of enemy territory in order to gauge their strength by the level of resistance. It is dangerous, but it is the fastest way to scout the enemy. Fortunately, the Weeping Marshes have relatively solid ground, so horses will be able to pass. If they avoid swamps and streams, breaking through right away will not be difficult. Do they have any questions? Van raised his hand and asked why they use reconnaissance in force instead of regular reconnaissance. She answered him that the territory is too large, and besides, monsters could be hiding there. Cautious reconnaissance would not help them count the total number of monsters. Therefore, they will deliberately invade the enemy and catch them off guard and observe their reaction. That way, they'll gather reliable information without wasting time. That's the essence of reconnaissance in force. The other commanders were delighted with her line of thought. It was bold, but it made sense. As expected of the heir to the Rodenwald family, she reminded them that they, too, were heirs to the royal elite. Praise was unnecessary. They didn't simply have to obey. Let them share their opinions. They train here too, so they don't have to worry or hold back. The captains were silent. Only MC voiced his opinion. Instead of a reconnaissance mission, it would be better to send a small group of scouts. Heinz became interested and explained his decision to them. Judging by the map, they would be immediately visible in the swamps. If they all went, they wouldn't have time. The monsters would notice them immediately. Amelia confirmed this, which is why they use reconnaissance missions. He said that they could be destroyed with the first strike, and she frowned, asking, "Does he think she will be overcome by some monsters?" He answered that he was responsible for the lives of his charges. He immediately assumed the worst. She thought about it and said that was unlikely, but she understood. Then what would they do? He answered that his unit would go forward and lure the enemy out. If the main forces went immediately after the monsters attacked, it was unlikely that anyone else would attack them. Amelia said she appreciated his courage in voicing his opinion. That's how a future officer candidate should behave. He frowned and thought, so what? Does she agree? But she didn't like his plan. She said it was too cowardly. The main forces of the Legion would arrive before the reconnaissance was finished. He objected, but she interrupted him and said, if they were spotted, the enemy would have time to prepare. Then they would definitely be destroyed. He became nervous, and she said that they should attack before the enemy was ready. That was the most effective method. He thought she was right, but he knew this operation would fail. He tried to convince her and said that they were currently a training unit, their ability to respond to a threat. She didn't let him finish and asked, what kind of threat? The number of enemies or traps? She needed proof. He clicked his tongue in frustration, not knowing what to tell her. He hadn't thought this through. In his past life, he'd been a simple mercenary, far from the western border then. Besides, the information about the monsters in the Weeping Marshes had been sealed and erased from official records by the Royal Army. Apparently, Heinz knew, but he would never have gotten involved in something like that. When he didn't hear an answer, Amelia said that unfounded worries were called cowardice. They only undermined the soldier's confidence. He wanted to object, but then she raised her voice and ordered him to stop. She was listening to their suggestions, but if he continued, she would consider it insubordination. He fell silent, and she announced the start of reconnaissance in force. She would lead the company, and all units should prepare. She turned to Van and said that since he wanted to be safe so much, his unit would be at the very end. It would be better that way. He cursed silently. Insubordination was punishable even for academy students. At best, expulsion, at worst, prison. The other commanders dispersed. They understood that Galda was excellent at reconnaissance and what he was about to do, but he was too brazen. Being empty-handed in the rear would not get him any recognition. MC became nervous and began frantically thinking about what to do. He had to do something, even in the rear. No, he needed to do something that could only be done in the rear. After that, they went on reconnaissance and ran out onto the field. As Amelia said, she leading all the squads. Monsters, Nox Fang, ran out to meet them. These are small monsters that live in the swamps. They are not very strong, but their fangs contain magical poison. A soldier told Amelia that there was a pack of monsters ahead. Will they retreat? She refused. They will run through the weakest. She used magic, and wind began to accumulate at the tip of her weapon, and then she used her storm spear, and all the monsters were scattered by a gust of wind. One of the commanders smiled, seeing the Rodenwald family's magic in action, and ordered his soldiers to follow Amelia. He shot down several monsters with fire arrows, and the soldiers were also impressed by their abilities. This was expected of academy students. At this rate, they would easily break through. Meanwhile, Van and his squad stood at the edge of the forest and watched these flashes of magic from afar. The man noted that everything had begun. They won't follow them? They can't do anything from here. MC told them not to worry. He quickly looked around and, pointing to a plant, ordered them to take it. They asked in confusion why they needed it. Lighting a fire certainly wouldn't help, and Van promised to explain everything to them later. For now, let them quietly collect these plants and as many as they can. They exchanged confused glances and began to carry out the order. Meanwhile, Amelia struck another monster with her spear and ordered the others to keep moving. The company quickly advanced. One of the soldiers noticed someone's silhouette in the dust ahead and reported it to the captain. He glanced at the soldier and praised him, and the captain asked in anticipation, "Will they begin the hunt?" He replied that he would now strike first. But just as he urged his horse forward, lightning suddenly struck him with a deafening roar. The last sparks ran across his charred body, and then he fell along with his horse. The soldiers, who had just been full of fighting spirit, stared at him in shock, wondering what had happened. Amelia turned, looking for the monster that had done this. Right now, a huge beetle surrounded by lightning was heading towards them. The soldiers panicked and exclaimed, "What the hell is this? Could that gust of wind have been caused by this?" Heinz immediately realized what kind of monster it was. A thunderbug. One of the captains exclaimed that it couldn't be. Where did that come from? It's a high-class monster. This monster is usually found only in the northern mountain range. It's considered a natural disaster, and it takes an entire army to defeat it. The thunderbug prepared to attack again. The captain ordered his squad to retreat, and then lightning struck him, and he fell just like the first guy. Amelia became nervous. Lightning hits its target immediately. They can't defend against it, even with magic. The soldiers were terrified and turned to the company commander to retreat, and she thought things were bad. They were panicking. Heinz ordered everyone to calm down, and they immediately fell silent. He dismounted and warned them. If they tried to escape, they would be killed on the spot. Let them spread out and duck. The beetle must not see them. They must wait for the right moment and attack. Amelia thanked him for his help, and he asked what they would do next. To be honest, at this distance, even he couldn't pierce the thunder beetle's shell. She told him that neither could she. At this distance, the monster had everything under control. They needed to get closer to it. She would go alone and kill it. The soldier became worried, because if she attacked directly, the lightning would strike her. She told him not to underestimate the Rodenwald cavalry, it could withstand a couple of blows, and they should reform and protect the rear with His Highness. They understood her order, and she urged her horse forward, telling them to show how proud they were to be the king's soldiers. She prepared herself and thought that, judging by the previous lightning, the monster attacked every 5 seconds. At full speed, it could only strike once. If she holds out, it won't be able to reach her. Running closer to the beetle, she was about to use the storm spear, but suddenly something stopped the horse. Vines entangled its legs, and Amelia jerked. She saw it. It turned out the monster had wrapped the vines around the foot of the mountain. There were also monsters nearby. They bit into the horse's legs, and she got scared and reared up, and Amelia nervously asked it to calm down. After that, lightning struck them. Feeling a powerful discharge, she gritted her teeth and looked at the monsters that were also hit, and thought, doesn't the thunder beetle even care about its allies? They are also wounded. Does magic really work on its own? After the lightning strike, she couldn't move. The thunder beetle headed towards her, and the soldiers panicked, because even she couldn't defeat it. They turned to His Highness and asked what they should do, but he didn't know either. The enemy was very serious. Suddenly, Van's voice was heard behind the unit, calling out loudly and pointing towards the smoke, telling them to run there. All this time, he and his squad had been collecting smoke reeds to ensure their retreat. This plant, found in magical wastelands, absorbs the metal emitted by magic directly from the ground, and when burned, the reeds release smoke with particles of heavy metal. This smoke does not disperse with the wind and lies closer to the ground, creating a dense curtain. Heinz told the soldiers that the thunder beetle would not see them, so it would not be able to strike. Lightning is powerful, but the monster only attacks what it sees. They must rescue the wounded and make their way through the smoke into the forest behind. Heinz trusted him and ordered everyone to follow his orders, and they also ran towards the smoke, picking up those injured by lightning. Heinz called out to Van, saying that Lady Amelia was still there, and he rushed to her and offered to take her, but the soldiers should retreat immediately. The prince looked after him with a smile and said, agreed. Soon everyone had taken refuge in the forest, and the soldiers watched anxiously as Amelia's wounds were bandaged. Van, who had just returned from reconnaissance, approached them. Heinz praised him and asked about the situation, to which he replied, a whole horde of monsters are wandering near the forest. They are surrounded. The soldiers asked if they would be able to get out, and he told them that as soon as they leave the forest, they will find themselves in the open. Then lightning will destroy everyone. Heinz noted that they cannot sit here forever. MC agreed with him, and as soon as night falls, the monsters will begin to hunt. The prince noted with puzzlement, the wounded are getting worse. They need to regroup and take them to a doctor as soon as possible. The only luck is that they are still alive. He's grateful to him. He showed them the escape route. Van said that they must not die, and the prince became serious. That is why they must destroy that thunder beetle. He agreed with it. It is at the head of all the beasts. And then he realized something. Why is the prince not at all surprised? Seeing his wide eyes, Heinz asked what was wrong. MC gave him a suspicious glance, and silently told himself not to fall for that expression. He'd once made the mistake of thinking he could be relied upon. No matter how hopeless their situation seemed, they could always find a way out. But the real Heinz, his worst enemy, had taken everything from him. Amelia suddenly declared that she would kill it. This was all because of her. She ignored Van's warning and put the company in danger. There was no excuse. She knelt before Van, begging for his apology, which surprised everyone, and declared that she would try to fulfill her duties as a commander, and to do so, she would borrow his horse. He asked what she would do, and she confidently answered that she would break into the encirclement and act as bait while they escaped with the wounded. The soldiers were against this decision, as was Heinz. It would mean certain death. She told them that this way she would take responsibility. She turned to Van and His Highness, saying that she was counting on them to look after the soldiers. After some thought, MC said that he would lend her a horse, but if she died, that would be the end of it. He was against it. It was a terribly boring plan. She stared at him in bewilderment, and he said that they would all return home. To do this, they needed to kill the thunder beetle, and he had just the right plan. She looked at him in surprise, as did the soldiers. Everyone was now thinking about only one thing. No one would die? Was that even possible? Heinz remarked that it sounded very interesting. And what kind of plan was that? Everyone looked at him eagerly. Van glanced at the prince, then cleared his throat and said, they will begin the operation right after sunset. That's when the monsters will begin to advance. They must make it before then. Amelia asked why exactly that time? Better before sunset. It's safer. He answered her that during the day the monsters are more cautious. It's easier for them to calculate their actions. But right after sunset, when they are ready to attack, they are not so attentive. Amelia saw the logic in this, and he continued. First, one of them will use strong magic, thereby attracting the monsters. When the thunder beetle takes the bait, they will be able to locate it with the light of lightning, and then Amelia will take advantage of the moment while it is gaining strength for another strike and attack. She noted that there are a lot of monsters on the way to the beetle. If they are caught like last time, they will not be able to kill it. He said she was right. That's why they would change tactics. She would use her strongest technique, the battle cry. She had to defeat all the monsters that tried to stop her and get to the thunder bug in a straight line. She said that the Stern Spear's battle cry was a crucial spell that concentrated all her magic in one spot. If she wasted it on smaller monsters, she would quickly run out of power and wouldn't be able to break through the monster's shell. MC said that once she got to it, he would buy her time. He would ride with her. While he was driving away the monsters, she would concentrate all her magic and destroy the Thunderbug with her battle cry. Then the soldiers would deal with the remaining monsters, and they would get her out of there. One of the soldiers exclaimed that it was too dangerous. How would Galda fight the Thunderbug without magic? This was complete nonsense. He was sending Lady Amelia to her death. A man from Squad Van ordered them all to shut up. They better listen to the captain. Tell them to stop whining. A soldier asked in shock. Did he agree with this madman? Another guy said that they completely trusted the captain. He himself said that their death would not be in vain. They were putting their lives on the line. I believe in these words. The soldiers did not know what to say to this, and the squad looked at their captain with smiles. Amelia was surprised. She had not thought that they trusted him so much. She remembered his fight with Karina. One-on-one, he was the strongest enemy. What if he succeeds this time too? She decided to trust him and said that he would cover her. But for everything to work out, they needed to discuss one more thing. They must summon a monster. Who will be the bait? Even if the monster hits half strength, in the worst case, the bait will die immediately. Who is ready to go for this? Everyone was silent. No one was ready to go to certain death. Then, Heinz declared that he would do it, which immediately made the soldiers indignant and asked him to reconsider, as it was too dangerous. He replied that the royal family must protect the people and fight for them in the most dangerous battles. If not him, then who? Amelia looked down guiltily and said that it was all her fault. She couldn't ask His Highness to take on her burden. He put his hand on her shoulder and calmed her down, saying that all she had to do was kill the Thunderbug, and helping her was his responsibility, as she was the commander. She agreed with him, right? She was surprised and asked at the same time as Van if he would really do it. He replied that he would provoke as many monster attacks as possible, and they would deal with the Thunderbug. MC smirked and said that there was no need to persuade him to do that. As soon as they killed the Thunderbug, they needed to direct all their efforts to destroying the remaining monsters and retreating from there, so no one will attack them anymore. And lastly, everyone must return home. They will not leave anyone here, no one at all. With these words, he instilled hope in the soldiers. Amelia smirked. Now even she thought that he was capable of the impossible. Anything for the sake of the people. She used her magic to contact the rest of the squads and told them, this is the last operation. They must gather all their forces and fulfill their duty to the kingdom properly. Soon the time came for action. Heinz went out onto the field and thought, the time has come. Van is not only to be a hero, he will also show what he is capable of. He used his magic. It spread across the area like a wave along with a bright light, dispelling the darkness and fog. Everyone immediately felt incredible power. Now all the monsters will come to him. Soon after, a loud howl was heard. A pack of monsters headed towards him, and the soldiers came out of the forest to protect His Highness. They threw burning torches as far as they could, and illuminated everything ahead. Now they could see a whole horde of monsters of all kinds heading towards them. Seeing these ferocious beasts, the soldiers became nervous and wondered how many of them were there. They definitely couldn't handle them, but one of the MC squad soldiers told them not to panic. They needed to hold out until the Thunder Beetle used lightning. If they didn't protect the prince, it would be all over. Thanks to his words, they became more confident and boldly entered the battle, slashing and driving the enemies away from the prince. None of them had yet reached him. Heinz, meanwhile, peered into the darkness. Behind the monsters, he saw a bright flash and realized it was the Thunder Beetle. He immediately cast a magical protection on himself, and a flash of lightning reached him in a second, pierced the protection, and electrocuted him. Thanks to the magic, the blow was not as strong, but still very painful. The prince fell to his knees, exhausted, but thanks to him, they figured out the location of the Thunderbug, and Amelia and Van galloped towards it. Heinz decided to help them. He gathered his last bits of magic and threw a glowing sphere into the sky to illuminate their path. The sphere flew above them and hung in the air, allowing Amelia to see the road and choose the shortest route. MC was surprised. He glanced at Heinz, who had lost consciousness after the spell, and thought, why did he do that? Why this sacrifice? He didn't even think about his own safety. He was just like Heinz back then. He shook his head, trying to get rid of the thought. Now he needed to focus only on the battle. There were 4 seconds left until the next lightning bolt, and a flock of monsters appeared in their path. Amelia gathered her strength and struck the monsters with a storm spear, scattering them, and the Thunderbug was very close, which even surprised them. At this distance, they would have time to attack before the lightning activated. 3 seconds remained, but not everything was so simple. A huge golem emerged from the pile of dirt before them. It is a pseudo-life form that arose around a crystal of condensed underground magic. Its body is fragile, but due to its texture and enormous weight, it absorbs and disperses all physical impacts. Amelia was getting nervous. There was already so much mud here, they wouldn't be able to get up to speed. At this rate, they'd all die. Should she go around it? But Van ordered her not to stop. He jumped up and headed toward the golem. There were 2 seconds left. Using the momentum of the Stormlance's battle cry, Van jumped, rushing straight toward the golem like a projectile fired from a ballista. The core of golems born in natural form is always in the center, he wouldn't have succeeded with such force, but given his speed, he could penetrate it. He kicked the golem in the chest, shattering the core and passing right through. Chunks of mud were scattered everywhere. There was 1 second left. Amelia was surprised that he destroyed the golem with one blow, and when he fell, she deftly caught him and asked him, in the future, if he plans something crazy, then let him warn her first. He smiled nervously, telling her that he knew she would catch him. They ran toward the thunderbug, but there was no time left, and it had already begun to gather lightning. The bug's eyes flashed, and Amelia realized that the monster was about to strike, but now it was Van's turn. He rushed straight toward the monster, but it flew higher, and he realized that its target was Amelia. He shouted that he wouldn't let it do that, and Amelia called out to him worriedly. MC isn't just trying to block the line of fire. He's using an anti-monster move, a battering ram. He turned his head toward the ground and kicked the monster in the head, causing the lightning to strike in the other direction. This move uses the calf muscles, quadriceps, and gluteus maximus. It's a kick that harnesses the power of the body's 3 largest muscle groups and directs it forward. It wouldn't be enough to penetrate the beetle's thick shell. But the monster now understood that Van was a threat that needed to be eliminated and no longer aimed at Amelia. The thunderbug waved its legs, trying to hit him, and he thought that the monster was fast, but it was nothing compared to Karina's dance. Using the beetle's legs as a support, he jumped up and swung his arms sharply, parrying the blows, so he was level with the monster's head and rushed into a furious attack. He gathered his strength in his fist and delivered multiple blows to the monster's head, finishing with an elbow. After that, he increased the distance between them. The thunderbug remained in place and only growled, and MC thought, it doesn't look like it's hurt, but that doesn't matter. The main thing is not to let it regain its strength. The beetle launched its legs at him. He dodged each blow and continued to distract it. Meanwhile, Amelia gathered magic for a strike and watched this guy's movements in amazement. How could someone who didn't have magic fight like that? She remembered how her father trained her. Having lost her strength, she fell to her knees, and her father firmly ordered her to get up. The great power that they, noble people, possess is created to protect those who do not have this power. And when she thinks about the responsibility that lies on her shoulders, let her never let go of the weapon, no matter what. It is the pride of their family. Therefore, let her get up immediately. She gritted her teeth, took the spear and stood up, asking her father to say it again. She had never doubted this thought in her life, but now Van, the one who does not possess that very power, is protecting her. Was she wrong? Was this pride really just arrogance and overconfidence? So, it turns out, you don't have to master magic to be a worthy person. She nervously clenched her teeth, looked confidently at the monster, and thought that Prince Heinz and Van had given her one last chance. With this blow, she had to destroy this monster. At this time, MC delivered a few more blows. The monster made a kind of wheezing sound, and he wondered if it really worked. He decided to strike again. He approached, and at that moment, a huge, sharp stinger emerged from the beetle's abdomen and pierced his body. No one expected this. The links of the thunder beetle's tail can move individually, resembling the strike of a whip. The speed of the tail tip exceeded the reflexes of Van, who had specially trained for close combat. Amelia was very worried about him, but she had already regained her strength, and so she was ready to help him. But the thunderbug was in no hurry to let go of Van. It waved its tail to hide behind his body, and now Amelia couldn't attack. She looked at the monster with surprise and a hint of horror, not believing what she had just witnessed. The thunderbug works in a team with other monsters, accustoming the enemy to close combat and suddenly striking with its tail. And now it uses Van as a shield. This monster can think through tactics. She has never seen such a thing. Sparks began to gather around the bug. Amelia didn't know what to do. If the bug struck with lightning again, they would be unable to resist, but if she threw a spear, she would hit Van. She faced a difficult choice. MC understood this and told her it was okay. Let her act. Only then will they win. She objected, because then he would die, and he told her not to doubt. They no longer had time. He smiled and told her to act as a commander should. She was surprised to see his gaze. This wasn't a reckless desire to die, but a firm determination and unwavering faith in victory. She lowered her head and closed her eyes, replaying all his actions so far in her mind. He was right. This man was turning her worldview upside down again and again, so this time she would trust him completely. She gathered her strength and urged her horse forward, then gathered all the power of the thunder spear and took aim. Van waited for this, grabbed the beetle by the tail, and decided to use the combined trajectory reversal technique. The thunder beetle's tail consists of freely moving links, but he used the reversal technique on the tip of this one's tail, causing the monster to snap. The range of motion of the first joint of the tail was exhausted, and a loss of control occurred. When several axes of rotation coincide in one plane, control of movement becomes impossible. Without using magic, MC found the monster's weak spot. Using this technique, he made the monster flip over onto its back, and then he gave Amelia a signal, and a storm wind gathered at the tip of her spear. With a loud roar, she stabbed her spear forward. A powerful stream of magic pierced the thunder beetle's thick shell, causing an explosion, and the shockwave spread for kilometers. A huge depression remained at the impact site, and without even having time to catch her breath, Amelia jumped off her horse and ran there, calling for Van. She froze when she saw the monster's severed tail and Van lying nearby. His wounds were severe, so she ran up to him and worriedly told him to hold on a little longer. He couldn't die. He chuckled quietly and told her that it was spectacular. He really thought he was going to die. She calmed down a little when she saw that he was conscious and looked around, asking what had happened. Her spear wasn't capable of causing such an explosion. He turned his head towards the monster, glanced at the pieces that remained of it, and answered her. He attacked the beetle endlessly, always looking for its weak spot. He used a crushing blow, not at full force, but with increased spin. He aimed at the monster's shell and tested its ability to reflect blows. Finally, he found a place under the double veins of the wings on the thunder beetle's back, which absorbed vibrations. He realized that the monster stored all its magic there. He aimed the tip of the spear there. When she pierced the core, all the magic went out of control and caused an explosion. She asked in surprise, and he calculated all this. Fighting alone, he answered her with a smile. Something was risky. And then she sighed heavily and grabbed her head, after which she furiously called him an idiot. He should have at least warned her. She would go gray so soon because of him. He replied that he actually didn't have time, and he also knew that she could handle it. These words immediately calmed her down. She sighed heavily and asked with a smile, "Is he at it again?" "He's just something." She helped him up. He winced because of the severe pain in his stomach and said that it was too early to relax. The situation was still dangerous. Amelia agreed with him. They were in the middle of a pack of monsters. She had run out of magic, and he was seriously injured. They needed to join Prince Heinz as soon as possible. She approached the horse and looked around, wondering which direction to go. And MC meanwhile thought, actually, thunderbugs only remained in the north, and where did they come from here? If they came here on their own, they must have teamed up with other monsters. He approached the remains of the beetle, tore open its belly, and pulled out a shining stone, which was strange. It was a magic crystal. Natural magic collects in this crystal over many years. Even one such stone is very powerful. It's used to create magical devices and secret medicines, so it's much more valuable than a bag of gold. But where did it come from inside the monster? He's never seen anything like it. Maybe someone implanted it into the thunderbugs, but why would they need it? This is clearly no accident. Someone deliberately unleashed the most powerful monster on their company, and the target is apparently Prince Heinz. Amelia distracted him from his thoughts. She found the way. While the prince and the others distract the monsters, they will break through the crowds of monsters. She extended her hand to him, helping him to his feet, and he thought that the report could wait. First, they needed to survive. Suddenly, a voice sounded behind them that sent shivers down their spines. The stranger in white robes said that he didn't expect this. How could ordinary students defeat his beloved Thunderbug? Van immediately recognized the emblem on his clothes, and Amelia prepared for the attack and exclaimed that he was a survivor from the Purification faction. The man said that sounded offensive. The kingdom barely grabbed the lizard's tail and already thinks it's in their hands? They are the true main faction of the Guardians of the Great Pure Blood. The atmosphere became heavy. MC hadn't felt this in a long time. Only soldiers are familiar with this. Beyond logic or magic, this is a warning, an intuition. Some call it a premonition of death. The smell of death lingers around this man. And in his past life, he fought, risking his life, against war demons equal in strength to him, although this guy is even stronger. Amelia felt the same. She stepped forward and ordered Van to step back, and the man remarked on her courage. His fingers pointed the way to the realm of the dead. Threads stretched from his sharp nails to the ground, and he commanded the creatures to crawl out and devour everything in their path. Iron beetles are mid-class monsters with a durable shell. These monsters are extremely ferocious predators. One beetle is as strong as an entire platoon of seasoned soldiers. Even an expert mage can control 3 creatures at once, but this man controls 10 at once. A puppeteer mage, he is also extremely powerful, so it was he who summoned the thunder beetle, and the magic crystal helped him control it. The man pointed forward, commanding the beetles to leave their mark, and they rushed to attack. Amelia swung her spear furiously, driving them away. She missed most of them, and they surrounded them. MC called out to her excitedly, looking around nervously, watching the bug's movements. This caused his wound to open and begin bleeding. Seeing this, Amelia called out to him worriedly. Then a bug pounced on her, and she immediately raised her spear above herself to block the attack, but the bug's blow was so powerful that it crushed her spear and struck her in the stomach. A sharp pain pierced her body, and she immediately fell to the ground and didn't move anymore. Van was left alone. The man smirked and said that now it was his turn. He was just a dirty monkey, devoid of magic. But he shouldn't worry. He would return his dirty blood to this swamp. At his command, all the bugs flew towards him, making him very nervous. He'd lost too much blood and was barely standing. He had no choice. He'd have to use it. Suddenly, there was a bright flash, and everything froze. MC stared in shock at the bugs frozen in the air, not understanding what was going on, and then an ominous voice came from behind him, saying, "He's pathetic. He's throwing away the lives he so generously returns to him." Van turned around in horror and wondered, who was this? Was this a hallucination? No, he felt its crushing weight. The wolf asked discontentedly, didn't he understand anything? It was he who dragged his worthless body from the shores of time. MC was surprised. So it was he who gave him a second life? The wolf immediately warned him that he wasn't a merciful god to give him a chance every time, but he couldn't die so easily. He would lend him his power, but only this once, and the price would be this woman. Van immediately looked at her, guessing what he meant. He must sacrifice her, let him cut her throat, and swear to give him her blood. Then, these tiny insects will immediately turn to dust. MC looked up at him and told him not to joke with him like that. She is his comrade. The wolf smirked at his naivety and asked why he doubted. She is the child of the ancient ruler who deprived Galda of everything. This is a perfect opportunity to settle old scores. Van remembered how his house burned and frowned, and the wolf said, otherwise they will simply die. Let him think. It will be better if at least he survives. This way he can save the soldiers in the rear. That will be the best option. He looked at Amelia again and firmly refused, to the wolf's surprise. She trusted him with her life, forgot about her pride, and agreed to his crazy plan. She tried to protect him from these monsters. He doesn't care what her family is, she is his comrade. He knows better than anyone what it's like to be betrayed by someone you trusted. That's why he will never betray his own. One chance was enough for him, so let him just stand aside and watch him. The wolf measured him with a glance. He remarked that it was quite interesting, so let him show him what he's capable of. After that, his image dissolved and merged back into his body, and time continued its course. The beetles surrounded him, pounced on him at once, and the stranger stepped aside, confident that he was dead. He had already wasted time. Now he had a more important task. He heard some strange sounds, turned around to check what was going on, and saw something he didn't expect at all. MC quickly dealt with those monsters with his bare hands and was now looking at him firmly. The man rubbed his chin in confusion and said, the shells of these beetles are strong as steel. That's why he decided to rip their limbs apart. He's right? But he still thought it was impossible. Even if he knew how their bodies worked, a human couldn't do something like that with his bare hands. Van ignored his question and said that he definitely couldn't repeat it. He waved his hand, sending the bugs on the attack again, and MC prepared himself. He crouched, waited for the right moment, and then disappeared from the spot and found himself right next to the monster. He grabbed the bug by the head, tore it off, and jumped on another. The man was very surprised. Contrary to his expectations, he repeated the same trick again. At that moment, when time continued to flow, Van whispered something. Fall, heart, break these chains, and become a blade of pure instinct that kills only enemies. His words had no magic. It was not a spell. The words cut into him, forcing him to believe in his own strength. By convincing himself of this, MC deliberately turns off the neocortex responsible for rational thinking. This part of the brain receives information and sends it to the brainstem and basal ganglia, which control the survival instinct of movement. Thus, the gap in time created by thought is reset, and the excess of natural painkillers in the brain blocks the pain from muscle tears, thereby removing the fuse that the person uses unconsciously. In this way, he uses his maximum capabilities right up to the point of muscle tears. He uses the secret technique, selflessness. By casting aside his mind, he turns into a killing machine for enemies. But if this technique is used with a body that is not fully physically developed, lifespan at the cellular level will be reduced, so it is a forbidden technique. Van destroyed all the enemies around him and turned to the man. He became nervous. He noticed how his skin darkened and bloody tears were pouring from his eyes. Due to physical overexertion, all his capillaries burst. It's simply incredible that Galda, who does not possess magic, can do such a thing. He remembered the prophecy. The wolf, defeated in the battle of the Age of Gods, lurks in the tainted blood and waits for its moment. Now he saw exactly who it lurked in. He admitted that he was no ordinary Galda. He was a real threat to the pure blood of their kingdom. He was interfering with the order of light. He was the very filth that must be eliminated. But this power will take years of his life. He is not omnipotent, right? In the end, he will harm himself, but as a sign of respect for his obsession, he will also respond with all seriousness. He bled himself and said that he would try to completely destroy his soul. As soon as his blood fell to the ground, a wave of energy passed through the area and he commanded the monsters to rise. His blood is food, so let them rise and eat. Let them devour everything. All the demons in these swamps will become his blades that will destroy the filth. He spread his arms to the sides and with a mad smile told Van that all the local monsters would gather here. So what happens next? Will he run out of mana, or will he become food for the monsters? Let's play a game where lives are at stake. MC prepared for battle. Meanwhile, the monsters fighting the soldiers retreated abruptly, which confused them and even thought they had managed to defeat the Thunderbug. Heinz had already woken up by this time, and he knew for sure that the monsters had left for a reason. They were gathering together. What was going on? He hoped Van and the others were alive. Suddenly, a noise came from the forest. He turned around excitedly and wondered if they had really arrived. Meanwhile, the battle was in full swing. MC quickly moved across the battlefield, striking each monster. He didn't linger on one for too long and immediately moved on to the next. When he collided with the bug, he froze, tilted his upper body back, and began to dodge the swift strikes of the bug's steel legs. The sharp thorns still touched him, but he didn't pay any attention to the pain and hit the monster with his fist, tearing out its heart. Meanwhile, the man thought, his obsession is quite something, but either way, he's just a useless piece of flesh. Even if he blocks the bolt and achieves extreme strength, physical exhaustion is inevitable. Muscles scream in pain and tear, and shattered bones can no longer support the body. He will destroy it and be done with it. Van still missed one beetle. It managed to crawl behind him and strike. With a cry of pain, MC fell face first into the ground, and he was surrounded. The man looked at him mockingly and asked, "Is this really the end?" It was fast. He waved his hand, ordering the monsters to cut off his head, and the steel beetle rushed to attack. As soon as it approached him, he opened his eyes and stood up abruptly, then rushed towards the man, ignoring the monster. The cordon is like a trap for a cornered animal, designed to deceive the predator. The man stared at him in shock, completely unexpected, and Van was already very close. He clenched his fist and punched him in the face with all his might, and instantly he was thrown a huge distance with incredible speed. The blow shattered his forearm completely, making him lose consciousness and fall. Despite such a powerful blow, the man survived. If he hadn't had magic, he would have died instantly. Now he realized how dangerous he was. He had underestimated him, thinking him a weakling, but he turned out to be a worthy enemy, so he decided to kill him here and now. He raised his hands, sending the beetle to attack, and told that lousy monkey to disappear and never come back. The steel beetle was about to finish him off, but suddenly it hit him with a magic projectile and threw him back. It was Heinz's doing. He had arrived to their rescue along with the rest of the units and companies. The army of soldiers screamed loudly and rushed to the attack to save Lady Amelia and Captain Van. Huge monsters blocked their path, but they were immediately covered in a thick crust of ice. Helena told Karina that she had stopped them. The rest was up to her. She jumped off her horse and rushed to attack, saying that she didn't have to tell her, she was going to do it anyway. With a furious roar, she swung her sword, cutting a path for them, and the man thought, "Are these reinforcements? No, these are the main forces. With so many people here, he is no longer interested. Nothing can be done. He will catch the prince another time, but if they leave this guy alive, one day, he will prevent them from reaching their long-awaited goal." He snapped his fingers, sending another monster towards Van, and the commanders were afraid they would not have time to repel the attack. The man was sure that Galda's fate was sealed, but suddenly someone pounced on the monster from above and pinned it to the ground, preventing it from approaching Van. It was Arnulf. He glanced at the man, saying that it was time to destroy the insects, and he stared at him in shock and thought, "Isn't he from the Clauvius family? It seems that there are very talented children in this academy. It's a shame to waste such talent here. For the future of the kingdom, he will retreat." At last, he told Van that he escaped death, but next time he will definitely take his head. After these words, he disappeared, and when all the monsters were destroyed, MC's friends crowded around him, asking him not to die. Karina rolled him over onto his back and lifted him up. His skin had lost its lively appearance, had long since darkened, and acquired a slight purple tint. In a panic, she asked him to open his eyes, but he did not respond. They waited a little longer. Helena was horrified, and Ralph, frightened and in disbelief, asked, "Was he really dead?" Falk, panicked, called for healers, and Karina, with a trembling hand, touched Van's face and said that this couldn't be happening. He had to come to his senses. He hadn't become her squire yet. She wouldn't let him die. She burst into tears, her tears falling on his face, and then the healers arrived. They handed Van over to them and began to watch the process with concern. Helena couldn't resist asking how he was. The healer winced and shook his head, saying that the healing magic should awaken his life force, but it was gone. There was no spark to ignite it. Karina, frightened, went to the healer and exclaimed that these were all excuses, that he should heal him quickly. Ralph grabbed her hand to keep her out of his way, and the prince ordered him to do everything he could. He was a true hero. The healer continued his attempts, while Arnulf stood aside and watched. He looked at his skin tone. He'd seen this before. He'd once seen a girl who, in a similar fit of obsession, had lopped off the heads of her enemies, and he was small and watched in amazement. MC suddenly opened his mouth wide, gulping air. The healer himself was even surprised that he'd survived. His skin tone slowly began to return to normal. Karina was overjoyed, and Helena ordered the healer not to stop. He had to live, no matter what. The healer continued his treatment, and Arnulf left, wondering if he'd really gone beyond his limits. They set up camp there, and the next morning, the instructor arrived to take a statement. Van had already woken up, and everyone had gathered in his tent. The instructor said, "Judging by the Thunderbug attack, it was the work of the Purification faction, the Beast Tamers." Amelia confirmed this and added, "If the main forces had been even a second late, they would have perished." The instructor stared thoughtfully at his notebook, and the girls said that Prince Heinz and, most importantly, Captain Van Kolgar had resolved this hopeless situation. He had become bait for the Thunderbug and found its weak spot, and all she had to do was strike the monster with a spear, all thanks to him. The soldier said it was incredible, and Galda was capable of such a thing? She looked at him with displeasure and asked if something was wrong. He immediately told her that wasn't what he had meant. And she continued, even if they had excellent captains like Van Kolgar, it was she who had put her people in danger, and she was ready to accept any punishment. She bowed her head, waiting for the instructor's words, and MC began to worry. The man said he would write this in the report, but no one could have foreseen this, and she protected the people. No one died. He believed she deserved praise. She stared at him in surprise and thanked him, and Van breathed a sigh of relief. After that, the instructor said they were done. They would continue exploring that place, and they should rest. MC smiled and said, "It looks like no one will punish them. That's so great." The prince sat down next to him and added that everyone thought they were dead, and they even managed to find out where the Purification faction is now. A real achievement. Amelia smiled and noted that this was too strong a word. Without him and Van, she would already be dead. MC smiled because it concerned him too, and his friends entered the tent. Karina immediately cast a displeased glance at Amelia from the doorway, and she happily said, "Of course, she was also a great help. She is sincerely grateful to her." But that wasn't why she was staring at her like that. She exclaimed, "Why are they holding hands?" Van immediately felt uneasy, but Amelia calmly raised their hands and told her that they had fought back to back, and their souls had become one. Van was her comrade in arms forever. Karina was indignant and exclaimed, "So what now? Should we hold hands?" Helena noted with a smile that they had sat like that during the interrogation too, and the instructor had remained silent. Amelia pressed her hand to her chest and said that in this battle, they understood each other without words, trusted each other, and defeated death. For the first time, she felt so inspired. Karina realized she wouldn't listen and ordered Van to let her go, but he couldn't. She was using magic. Suddenly, Amelia turned him toward her and declared, "From now on, they support each other. This bond is forever." Karina was furious. She drew her sword, vowing to tear her apart, and MC excitedly asked her not to do it, and told someone to stop her. The next day, Van was already cheerful and doing business in the camp. One of his subordinates asked if he needed to carry anything else, but he refused. They shouldn't worry about him. The man angrily asked, "How could they not worry? He almost died yesterday." Another guy took Van's things, saying that he would carry everything himself, and MC looked at them with a bitter smile. While they were doing their business, he sat down on a stump, turning over their words in his head. He almost died, or he was supposed to die. When he woke up, the crystal's magic was destroyed. He barely crawled out, even the mages gave up. But now he is full of strength and thinks only about the wolf who used this magic to save him. How did he do it? What does he want from him? Suddenly, out of the corner of his eye, he noticed movement next to him. Arnulf quietly approached him, and he immediately put the crystal away and said with a smile that he saved him yesterday. "Thank you alone will not be enough." Arnulf suddenly punched him, but he quickly reacted and stopped it, noting that it was a stern greeting. Now was no time for jokes. Arnulf looked at his fist and said it was a zero grip, meaning he was familiar with this fighting art. Van was startled. He wanted to ask how he knew, but he didn't let him finish and told him to come see him when they returned to the academy. He wanted to know something. He left, leaving Van confused. How did he know his Galda shadow techniques? When they returned to the academy, an award ceremony was held. All three were awarded by the director personally. Taking the insignia, he approached Amelia and said, "She led the front lines and opened the way despite the sudden attack of an unexpected enemy. Her unwavering fighting spirit is a true example for the royal elite, and he is awarding her for special merit." She bowed, saying she was honored, and all the students applauded her. Now Prince Heinz Ferrania, he sacrificed himself by becoming the enemy's target to protect the squad. He showed what a member of the royal family should be, and therefore he is awarding him for special merit. Everyone applauded again, and as soon as the director went to Van, disgruntled whispers were heard. MC felt uneasy, but the director quickly distracted him from them. Despite not having any magic, he found the Thunderbug's weakness, showed ingenuity and courage, and led them to victory. He's proud that such a unique talent has emerged in their academy, and that's why he's rewarding him for his exceptional achievements. Van was thrilled to see the insignia. He thanked the director, and applause broke out, but not from everyone. Half of them, of course, were unhappy that some Galda had become the pride of the academy, and Leonius belonged to that half. After the awards ceremony, the three of them went out into the courtyard, and Amelia said she still couldn't accept it. Because of her arrogance, the squad got into trouble, and she was even awarded. MC asked, "Is this the same thing again?" Heinz asked her not to beat herself up so much. Without her thunder spear, they would all have died. That much was obvious. And he hadn't done much. He was just bait. Van said he risked his life. Without it, they would already be lying at the bottom of the swamp. Heinz smiled, noting that these words from him were more pleasant than the award, and he looked away, replying that it was a fact. Even so, he, a mere Galda, had been awarded. Heinz said that he truly deserved it. Of course, the academy had its own motives. They were attacked by the Purification faction, many were injured, and this was a major blow to their reputation. MC wasn't at all surprised and noted, so they showed off the heroes so that everyone would think the academy had won. Apparently, all this was just for show. Heinz stood up abruptly and leaned toward him, smiling. He wasn't just capable, he also saw the whole picture, as it really was. Van didn't understand what he was getting at, and he seriously offered him a job after graduating. MC's face turned shocked, and anxiety began to brew within him. Heinz said that he had a dream, and for it to come true, he must take the throne. He put his hand on his shoulder and continued with a smile. That's why he needs someone like him. His strength is unique. They can change this country together. What does he think about it? Van was stunned. He was saying that again. His words angered him, and the events of that day immediately started spinning in his head. Memories flooded him until his head hurt. He dropped the medal and squeezed the prince's wrist tightly, trying to control himself. Suddenly, Amelia called out to His Highness. She stood between them and asked him to forgive her insolence, but she could not ignore his words. MC could finally breathe a sigh of relief. A little more, and it would have happened. She saved him. But she was right. The ninth prince cannot take the throne. It's the same as saying that he will get rid of the other princes. But she did not intervene because of that at all, but to say that Van would go with her. He stared at her in confusion, and Heinz asked, "Is this true?" Amelia was embarrassed and flustered, mumbling something. She hadn't offered him anything yet, but she couldn't lie either. MC angrily asked them to stop making decisions for him, and Karina and Helena approached them. The latter congratulated him on receiving his insignia. Karina playfully elbowed Van and exclaimed that this was expected of her squire. Perhaps he'll join the 5 Crowns next year? He thanked her for the congratulations and said, puzzled, "It seems the Academy's leadership isn't so carefree these days." Helena agreed with him. The royal palace was discussing the incident with the utmost seriousness. Karina noted that the prince had almost died, and Helena thoughtfully remarked, they suspected the kingdom's plans were leaked to the purification faction. The Academy will investigate and report everything to the palace. MC thought about this, and Helena said with a smile that they could rejoice for now. She put her hand on his shoulder. They had taken a big step towards their goals. He looked at his insignia as if seeing it for the first time. Now he realized that they had truly advanced. Knighthood, he was born to become a member of the royal elite and change this country with his own hands. He smiled and agreed with her. Karina looked at them with displeasure and asked what they meant by their goals. Amelia pounced on Helena, asking her to explain everything in detail, and Karina grabbed Van, threatening him with a serious talk. Later that night, MC went to the academy training ground where Arnulf was training. He looked at him and remembered a recent conversation with his friends. He asked them about Arnulf. The girls said that he was special, even among the 5 Crowns. He was 17, and he had already become the head of the Clauvius family. Heinz added that he was a master of magic, respected even by the instructors, but Karina hated him because it was impossible to tell what was going on in his head. And now, looking at him, Van could add that he mastered Galda's shadow combat techniques. Arnulf lunged, struck, paused, and thought about something, then turned to Van and noted that he had finally arrived. He smiled, saying that he had saved his life after all, and the guy immediately warned him that he didn't owe him anything. Even though he was older, he didn't have to respect him. He had called him to talk privately. MC asked what he wanted, and he decided to say it directly. He wanted him. He was taken aback by such an unexpected statement, but Arnulf didn't mean anything by it. He said that the Academy had tasked him with conducting a secret investigation, and he was supposed to interview the students. Therefore, he wanted to appoint him as his assistant. Van was surprised by this. He scratched his head in confusion and said he understood what you were talking about, but first he would like to ask a couple of questions. First of all, he is a student, so why was he assigned to work undercover? He reminded him that he is the head of the Clauvius family, and he, after thinking for a few seconds about his unclear answer, clarified, so they trust him because of his position? He nodded and asked why he wants him to become his assistant. Arnulf answered him, he is Galda. MC again did not understand him and said that the purification faction hates him, so he is unlikely to be their informant. Is he right? Arnulf replied. He also does not have magic and can fight, that's all. Van didn't even know what to say. He frowned, straining every convolution of his brain to understand what he meant. The lack of magic means that he will not be detected. How terribly, he explains. But there is still logic. He decided to ask one more thing. After the Legion training, he approached him. It wasn't because of this undercover mission, was it? He received the mission later, so why did he call him then? Arnulf told him that he wanted to ask him something, but now only after the mission. MC said that he was just avoiding the answer, and he asked, didn't he have questions too? He was right. Van really wanted to ask him about the techniques. Arnulf said that when everything was over, they would answer all of each other's questions. Did he agree? He looked down and thought, this means that he should suspect his own comrades. Such people are hated. But this way he will achieve a lot. He will become closer to the title of knight, and also if they ignore the purification faction, everything will end in civil war. In his past life, a war started and the king died. That's why the prince won. And if another war happens and Heinz becomes king again, everything will repeat itself. He agreed to this. But when it was all over, they would definitely talk, and Arnulf promised him this. A new day began, and after classes, Van's friends approached him and asked if he wanted to attend a seminar. MC thought about it. Now was the perfect time. A seminar is a special lesson with an instructor, different from regular lectures. Only those approved by the instructor can attend, and all these students study in a small group. Ralph enthusiastically declared that he wanted to go to Instructor Vargas, a magical swordsman, and Falk decided to go to Instructor Maris, a wind mage. Van was puzzled. He doubted that anyone would take him since he didn't have magic. But Ralph said it didn't matter. He could go to Professor Bartholomew. He's a theorist. He doesn't have a specific style. He's known for taking any students. Even lower-class students and ordinary people attended his seminars, but he's a true master. Some students achieve great heights thanks to him. MC didn't even know they had such a teacher and thought, this is not bad. He devoted enough time to theory in his past life. He told the boys that it all sounded great, but he still had things to do. He said goodbye to them, promising to go to the seminar next time, and went to the garden, where Arnulf was already waiting for him. He sat down next to him and suggested that he begin his investigation. Van asked where they should start, but he simply remained silent and stared at him. MC waited a few seconds, then couldn't resist asking what was going on. Arnulf, looking thoughtful, asked if they should start with a survey. Van was indignant. He hadn't thought anything through at all. This guy, he'd thought about it yesterday, but he was just a mindless mountain of muscle. Arnulf said he had no experience with such things, and if he had any ideas, let him suggest them. MC stared at him, confused, wondering if he wanted to hear his ideas. He was so weird. Even Amelia didn't immediately recognize him. Noticing his expression, the guy asked, "Is that a problem?" MC pulled himself together and began to reason. In situations like these, there are 4 variables: people, goods, money, and information, and how they operate. The Purification faction attacked them right during training. They knew exactly when they would arrive at the swamps, which meant they needed to suspect whoever received this information first. And the first thing they would notice was the flow of information. Arnulf noted that he knew quite a lot, and he looked away, lying about reading a lot. He couldn't say he spent his past life in a world of conspiracies and shadow wars, and they both immediately realized who the prime candidate was, Amelia. When they approached her, she greeted them with a smile and said she had nothing to offer them, but still, they should make themselves at home. But she certainly didn't expect to see them together. MC smiled awkwardly and said that they just wanted to ask her a few questions.